In the sleepy village of Chipping Cleghorn, a chilling newspaper ad declares, "A murder is announced at Little Paddocks, 6:30 p.m. And when a stranger is shot dead in a staged blackout, the game turns deadly. Miss Jane Marple, a Sharbid spinster, unravels a web of deceit. Charlotte Blacklock, posing as her sister to seize a hidden fortune, orchestrates killings to bury her past Trudy Schurz, a blackmailer. Dora Bunner, a friend with dangerous memories. And Amy Murgatroyd, who saw too much. With accomplices entangled in greed and fear, Marple's quiet wisdom exposes a killer, proving no secret stays buried in this village of shadows." Chapter 1. The Advertisement. The October mist clung to the hedgerows of Chipping Cleghorn, softening the outlines of its tidy cottages and lending an air of secrecy to the village. By 8 o'clock, the Morning Post had thudded onto doormats, and with it came the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette, a modest weekly that chronicled the small triumphs and smaller scandals of rural life. Most villagers skimmed its pages over breakfast, noting the date of the Women's Institute meeting or the price of Moreaus at the market. But on this particular Friday, October 22nd, a single item in the personal column halted teaspoons, midway to mouths and set tongues, wagging before the marmalade was cleared away, tucked between an appeal for a lost terrier and a notice for piano. Lessons was an announcement so peculiar that Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, read it thrice before believing her eyes. "A murder is announced and will take place on Friday, October 29th, at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. Friends, please accept this, the only intimation." No signature, no explanation. Those stark, intriguing words. By 9, Mrs. Finch had relayed the news to the butcher, who told the baker, who whispered it to the milkman. By 10, the village buzzed with speculation, each theory more fanciful than the last dot. At Dyer's Hall, Colonel Easterbrook, retired and fond of his morning pipe, chuckled over the notice. "Some sort of game, Laura. Mark my words," he said to his wife, a vivacious woman 30 years his junior, who was painting her nails at the breakfast table. "Letty Blacklock's always been one for surprises. We'll go along, won't we?" Laura, glancing up with a mischievous smile, agreed. It sounded amusing. "As long as there's sherry," she added, "and nobody expects me to play the victim." Across the village, at Boulders, Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd debated the matter over porridge. Miss Hinchcliffe, a wiry woman with a farmer's grip, snorted. "Sounds like nonsense, Amy, but I suppose we'll turn up." Letitia's not the sort to waste good biscuits on a prank. Miss Murgatroyd, softer and prone to dithering, fretted about the wording. "It's so ominous, Hinch. What if it's not a game?" Her companion laughed, patting her arm. "Then we'll tackle the murderer ourselves. Eat your oats." In the vicarage, Mrs. Harmonbunch to her friends spilled her tea as she read the advertisement aloud to her husband. The Reverend Julian Harmon. Good heavens, Julian, a murder at Letty's. It must be a joke. The vicar, absorbed in his sermon notes, murmured absently about youthful high spirits. Bunch, undeterred, decided they must attend. "It's practically our duty," she declared, "and besides, I'm dying to see what Letitia's up to." The subject of this village-wide intrigue, Miss Letitia Blacklock, sat in the sunny morning room of Little Paddocks, a Georgian cottage with roses climbing its walls. She was a handsome woman in her early 60s, her dark hair streaked with silver, her posture as upright as her reputation. Over coffee, she shared the Gazette with her house guests. Her cousin Patrick Simmons, a charming young man with a Gren, his sister Julia, whose sharp wit matched her sleek bob, and Dora Bunner, an old-school friend whose vague manner belied a loyal heart. The household was completed by Philippa Hames, a quiet widow who rented the cottage's annex, and Mitzi, the excitable Hungarian maid who clattered pots in the kitchen. Patrick read the advertisement aloud, his voice tinged with mock solemnity. "Well, Aunt Letty, are you plotting a crime or merely the victim?" Letitia laughed, but her eyes flicked to the paper. "It's absurd," she said briskly. "Someone's idea of a lark, I suppose. I've half a mind to ignore it." Dora, peering over her spectacles, gasped, "Oh, Letty, you can't. People will come, you know they will. We must have cakes, and perhaps a little play-acting." Julia, rolling her eyes, muttered about village busybodies, but Patrick clapped his hands. "Let's make a night of it, then. A murder mystery. I'll be the dashing detective." Letitia hesitated, then smiled. "Very well, we'll treat it as a game. But I do wish I knew who placed this ridiculous notice." Her tone was light, but her fingers smoothed the tablecloth with a touch of unease. Mitzi, bursting in with a tray, overheard and shrieked, "Murder! In this house! I leave tomorrow." It took 10 minutes of soothing to calm her, during which Philippa slipped in, read the notice silently, and retreated without a word. Father Affield, in Medenham Wells, Miss Jane Marple sat in the cosy parlour of her nephew's wife, Joan, who had invited her for a fortnight's rest. Miss Marple, with her fluffy white hair and deceptively mild blue eyes, was no stranger to the undercurrents of village life. Joan, an artist with a penchant for gossip, thrust the Gazette under her nose. "Look at this, Aunt Jane. A murder. Announced at Chipping Cleghorn. Isn't it deliciously absurd?" Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and read the notice. Her lips pursed slightly. "Absurd, perhaps," she said softly, "but not without purpose. The wording is precise, almost formal. It's meant to draw attention." Joan laughed, suggesting it was a stunt by some bored youth. Miss Marple, folding her knitting, demurred. "I've known stranger things to begin with a jest, my dear. I think we might visit Chipping Cleghorn next Friday. It would be illuminating." Her eyes, keen as a hawk's, belied the gentle smile she offered by midday. Chipping Cleghorn had settled on a consensus. The advertisement was a parlour game, and Little Paddocks would host a thrilling evening. Invitations were neither issued nor needed. The village assumed its right to attend. But beneath the excitement, a few minds turned to darker possibilities. And in her quiet corner, Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing through the ordinary to the sinister, felt a prickle of foreboding. She opened her notebook, jotted a few names, and murmured, "We shall see." Chapter 2. The Gathering. The October evening wrapped Chipping Cleghorn in a chill embrace. The sky bruised with clouds that promised rain. Little Paddocks, its windows aglow, stood at the edge of the village, its rose-covered walls softened by dusk. Inside, the drawing-room buzzed with anticipation, its chintz curtains drawn against the gathering dark. The room was a study in comfortable clutter, a mahogany sideboard laden with decanters, a sagging sofa, and a fireplace where logs crackled cheerfully. A grandfather clock ticked toward 6:30 p.m., the hour appointed by the mysterious advertisement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette. The villagers, drawn by curiosity and the promise of excitement, arrived in twos and threes, their voices a lively hum. Miss Letitia Blacklock, the mistress of Little Paddocks, moved among her guests with practiced grace. Her dark dress, relieved. By a cameo brooch complemented her upright figure and silver-streaked hair. She was every inch the hostess, her smile warm but her eyes alert, as if gauging the mood of the room. "Such a peculiar business, this notice," she said to Colonel Easterbrook, who stood by the fire, twirling his mustache. "I hope you're not expecting a real corpse." The colonel, a wiry man with a soldier's bearing, laughed heartily. "Not at all, Letty. A bit of theatrical fun, I dare say. Reminds me of mess nights in Poona." His wife, Laura, perched on the sofa's arm, her auburn curls catching the lamplight. At least 30 years younger than her husband. She wore a green dress that clung a shade too tightly, her laughter a touch too bright. "Oh, I do hope it's thrilling," she said, accepting a sherry from Patrick Simmons, Letitia's cousin. Patrick, a lanky young man with an impish grin, bowed theatrically. "Thrilling is my specialty, Mrs. Easterbrook. Shall I play the villain or the sleuth?" Laura's eyes sparkled. "Villain, definitely. You've the look of one." Nearby, Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd formed a contrasting pair. Miss Hinchcliffe, her tweed jacket square on her broad shoulders, surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. "Whole thing's a lot of rot," she muttered, sipping her gin. "But Letitia's got the best shortbread in the county. So here we are." Miss Murgatroyd, round-faced and bundled in a woolen cardigan, nodded anxiously. "I don't like it, Hinch. That advertisement it gave me the shivers. Suppose it's not a game." Miss Hinchcliffe patted her arm, her voice gruff but kind. "Don't fuss, Amy. If it's real, I'll box the blighter's ears myself." Mrs. Harmon, known to all as Bunch, bustled in with her usual energy, her round face flushed from the walk. "What a lark, Letitia," she exclaimed, shedding her coat. "Julian's stayed home to wrestle with his sermon, but I wouldn't miss this for the world." She turned to greet Miss Marple, who had arrived with her from Medenham Wells. Miss Jane Marple, slight and white-haired, seemed almost lost in the crowd, her blue eyes mild behind her spectacles. Her lavender dress and lace shawl marked her as a relic of gentler days, but her gaze missed nothing. "A most unusual invitation," she murmured to Bunch, her voice soft. "I wonder who composed it." Letitia, overhearing, joined them. "I wish I knew, Miss Marple. It's caused such a stir. I've decided to treat it as a jest and hope we all enjoy ourselves." Her tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of her lips, the way her hand lingered on her brooch. "A sensible approach," Miss Marple replied, "though I confess the phrasing intrigues me. It's so very precise." The room filled steadily. Dora Bunner, Letitia's old friend, fluttered about in a faded floral dress, her grey curls escaping their pins. "Oh, Letty, it's like old times, isn't it?" she said, her voice tremulous with excitement. "All these people, do you remember? Our charades at school." Letitia smiled indulgently. "I do, Bunny, but let's hope this evening is less chaotic." Dora's chatter trailed off as she spotted Julia Simmons, Patrick's sister, entering with a cool nod. Julia, her dark bob sleek and her grey eyes sharp, wore a tailored suit that spoke of London rather than Chipping Cleghorn. "Really, Patrick," she said, "must you flirt with every woman here?" "It's exhausting," Patrick winked. "Only the pretty ones, Jules." Philippa Hames, the quiet widow who lodged in the cottage's annex, slipped in almost unnoticed. Her fair hair was pulled back severely, her plain dress doing little to brighten her pale face. She accepted a glass of lemonade and retreated to a corner, her eyes fixed on the carpet. Mitzi, the Hungarian maid, darted among the guests, her black dress and white apron crisp, despite her nervous energy. "I do not like this," she hissed to Letitia, balancing a tray of sandwiches. "All these people, and talk of murder. In my country, such things bring bad luck." Letitia patted her arm. "Nonsense, Mitzi. It's just a bit of fun. Now, do fetch more biscuits." The clock's hands crept toward 6:30. The guests, now numbering a dozen, formed loose knots of conversation, their laughter punctuated by the clink of glasses. Colonel Easterbrook recounted a tiger hunt to Patrick, who listened with exaggerated awe. Laura Easterbrook, bored, drifted toward Julia, complimenting her suit with a hint of envy. Miss Hinchcliffe and Bunch debated the merits of local cider, while Miss Murgatroyd hovered, clutching her handbag as if it might shield her from danger. Dora flitted from group to group, her anecdotes muddled but earnest. Philippa remained apart, her silence a contrast to the room's vivacity. Miss Marple, seated near the fire, observed it all. Her knitting lay untouched in her lap, her needles still. To Bunch, she seemed merely a kindly old lady, but her mind was as sharp as the pins in her shawl. She noted Patrick's easy charm, the way his eyes flicked to Letitia when he thought. No one watched. Julia's aloofness, she suspected, masked a keen intelligence. Dora's ramblings, though incoherent, hinted at a shared history with Letitia that bore exploring. Philippa's withdrawal puzzled her grief perhaps, or something deeper. And Mitzi's agitation seemed out of proportion to a mere parlour game. Letitia herself was the enigma, poised, yet with a watchfulness that suggested she knew more than. She let on as the clock struck 6:30, a hush fell. The guests turned expectantly, half smiling, waiting for the promised spectacle. Letitia clapped her hands. "Well, now, shall we see what this murder is about?" Her voice was bright, but Miss Marple caught a tremor in it. Before anyone could reply, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. The room plunged into a void broken only by a collective gasp. A woman, Miss Murgatroyd, perhaps whimpered. Then, from the doorway, a harsh voice barked, "Stick 'em up." A torch beam stabbed through the gloom, swinging wildly across the guests' faces. Miss Marple, her back to the wall, felt a prickle of unease. The voice was male, young, with a trace of an accent. A figure loomed in the torchlight, masked, a revolver glinting in his hand. "Nobody move," he shouted. A scream at Stis pierced the air. Then 3 shots rang out, sharp and deafening. Glass shattered somewhere. The torch dropped, its beam spinning across the floor. A thud followed, heavy and final. The guests froze, their breaths ragged in the dark. Seconds later, the lights snapped back on. Chaos erupted. Miss Murgatroyd clung to Miss Hinchcliffe, sobbing. Laura Easterbrook shrieked, her sherry glass smashed at her feet. Colonel Easterbrook barked, "Steady, now." As he pushed toward the door, Letitia stood by the sideboard, a hand to her ear, blood trickling between her fingers. "I'm all right," she said faintly, as Dora rushed to her, wailing, "Letty, oh, Letty." Patrick knelt by the doorway, where a young man lay sprawled, his mask askew, a revolver beside him. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a bullet hole in his temple. Miss Marple, untouched in her corner, took it all in. The man was young, fair-haired, his cheap suit rumpled. She recognized him, vaguely a clerk from the Royale Hotel in Meddenham Wells, she thought. The room was a tableau of shock. Julia, pale but composed, helping Letitia to a chair. Philippa, her face ashen, gripping the lemonade glass until her knuckles whitened. Mitzi collapsed in a heap, moaning about curses. Bunch, practical as ever, fetched a cloth for Letitia's ear, murmuring, "It's just a graze, thank goodness." Colonel Easterbrook examined the body. "Dead," he pronounced. "Shot himself, by the look of it. Damned fool." Patrick, rising, shook his head. "Those shots too went wild, I think. There's a hole in the wall." He pointed to a splintered panel near the window. Miss Hinchcliffe, her jaw set, checked the revolver. "3 rounds fired," she said grimly. "One got him, one grazed Letitia, and one's in the woodwork." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The timing of the blackout, the precision of the shots, the convenient suicide, it was too neat. She glanced at Letitia, whose pallor contrasted with her steady voice, as she reassured Dora, "I'm fine, Bunny, just a scratch." But her gaze darted to the body, and Miss Marple saw something flicker in it, fear, or perhaps recognition. Bunch, at Miss Marple's side, whispered, "This wasn't a game, was it?" Miss Marple shook her head slightly. "No, my dear, this was meant to happen." She noted the creak of a door behind the sofa, half hidden by a curtain. It led to the hall, she recalled, and it had not been used during the party. Had someone slipped out in the dark? She filed the thought away. Within 20 minutes, the police arrived, led by Inspector Craddock, a lean man with a deceptively mild manner. His grey eyes swept the room, taking in the body, the guests, and the bullet hole. "Nobody touch anything," he ordered, as his constable cordoned off the doorway. He knelt by the body, confirming the colonel's assessment. "Rudy he said, checking the man's wallet. "Works at the Royale. Small-time crook, by our records." He stood, addressing Letitia. "Miss Blacklock, can you explain this?" Letitia, now bandaged by Bunch, met his gaze. "I wish I could, Inspector. That advertisement brought everyone here. I thought it was a prank. Then this man appeared, and it all happened so fast." Her voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. Craddock nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll need statements from everyone. Nobody leaves until we're done." As the guests murmured, some indignant, others shaken, Craddock's men began their work. Miss Marple, overlooked in the bustle, watched closely. Patrick's bravado had faded. He hovered near Julia, who stared at the body with an odd intensity. Philippa, still in her corner, seemed to shrink further into herself. Mitzi, revived, babbled to a constable about evil spirits. Dora clung to Letitia, her eyes wide with terror. The Easterbrooks argued in low tones, Laura's voice sharp. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces grim. Miss Marple's mind turned over the details. The advertisement's formality, the blackout's precision, the shot's timing. Rudy Scherzer's death was no accident, she was certain. But was he the intended victim, or was Letitia? And who had orchestrated this deadly charade? She glanced at the creaking door again, then at Letitia's grazed ear. A very narrow escape, she murmured to herself. Or perhaps not an escape at all. Craddock approached her, his notebook open. "Miss Marple, isn't it? From a Denham Wells. Care to tell me what you saw?" She smiled, her eyes guileless. "Very little, Inspector. It was dark, you see, but I did hear the door creak just before the lights went out, and the young man's voice, it had a trace of an accent, Swiss, perhaps." Craddock's brow lifted slightly. "You're observant. Anything else?" Miss Marple hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet, Inspector, but I'm sure you'll find the truth. As Craddock moved on, Miss Marple settled back, her knitting resumed. The room's warmth could not dispel the chill she felt. Chipping Cleghorn, so peaceful on the surface, hid secrets as dark as the night outside, and she, with her quiet ways and sharp mind, would uncover them one stitch at a time. Chapter 3. The Inquest. The village hall of Chipping Cleghorn. A squat building with peeling paint and a perpetually leaking roof was unaccustomed to such crowds. On the morning of November 1st, its benches groaned under the weight of villagers. Their Sunday best dusted off for the inquest into Rudy Scherz's death. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and murmured speculation, as if the hall itself held its breath. Outside, a drizzle pattered against the windows, blurring the outlines of the yew trees in the churchyard across the lane. Inside, the coroner, a dour man named Mr. Pettigrew, presided with the air of one who preferred his ledgers to human drama. Miss Letitia Blacklock sat in the front row, her dark coat buttoned to the chin, her face composed but pale. The graze on her ear, now a thin scab, was half hidden by a silk scarf. Beside her, Dora Bunner fidgeted, her gloved hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. Patrick Simmons lounged with studied nonchalance, his tie slightly askew, while Julia, her grey eyes cool, scanned the room as if cataloguing its occupants. Philippa Hames, seated apart, stared at her clasped hands, her fair hair falling like a curtain over her face. Mitzi, excused from attendance due to hysterics, remained at Little Paddock's, though her absence did little to quiet the villagers' whispers about her wild tales. Miss Marple, tucked into a corner near the back, blended into the crowd like a sparrow among starlings. Her black hat, adorned with a single violet, bobbed as she leaned toward Mrs. Harmon, who had insisted on attending despite her husband's gentle protests. "It's all so grim, isn't it, Aunt Jane?" Bunch whispered, her round face creased with unease. Poor Letitia, having to sit through this. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Yes, my dear, but it's often in such settings that truth begins to show itself. People reveal more than they intend when they're nervous." Her knitting needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the coroner's gavel as he called the room to order. Inspector Craddock, standing near the coroner's table, was a study in quiet authority. His grey suit was immaculate, his expression neutral, but his eyes missed nothing. He had spent the days since the shooting at Little Paddock's interviewing witnesses, examining the crime scene and piecing together Rudy Scherz's meagre history. The inquest, he knew, would be a formality, but it offered a chance to observe the players in this peculiar drama. He glanced at Letitia, noting the faint tremor in her hands despite her rigid posture. A victim, or something more. He wasn't sure yet. Mr. Pettigrew cleared his throat, his voice reedy but firm. "We are here to inquire into the death of Rudy Scherz, aged 24. Found deceased at Little Paddock's on October 29th. Let us proceed with the evidence." The first witness was Dr. Hargreaves, the local physician who testified in clipped tones. Scherz had died instantly from a single gunshot wound to the temple, the bullet matching the revolver found beside him. 2 other shots had been fired, one lodged in the drawing room's panelling, the other grazing Miss Blacklock's ear. The revolver, a Webley .38, bore Scherz's fingerprints and no others. A clear case of suicide, perhaps, Dr. Hargreaves concluded, though the circumstances are unusual. The villagers murmured, their whispers like leaves rustling in the wind. Suicide, a botched robbery. The advertisement's shadow hung over the proceedings, its cryptic words repeated in every household. Miss Marple, listening, noted the doctor's careful phrasing. Perhaps, she murmured to Bunch, a useful word when one isn't certain. Next came Letitia Blacklock, her voice steady as she recounted the evening. The advertisement in the Gazette puzzled me, she said, her hands folded in her lap. I assumed it was a prank, perhaps by someone in the village with a taste for mischief. I decided to treat it as a game, welcoming those who came. At 6:30, the lights went out, and that young man appeared, waving a torch and a gun. He shouted, then fired. When the lights returned, he was dead, and my ear was bleeding. Her account was concise, almost rehearsed, and Mr. Pettigrew nodded, asking only, "Did you know the deceased?" "No," Letitia replied firmly. "I'd never seen him before." A ripple passed through the crowd. Miss Marple's needles paused. Letitia's denial was swift, but her scarf shifted slightly, revealing the scar on her necker. Detail Miss Marple filed away. Dora, beside Letitia, dabbed her eyes, muttering, "Poor Letty, such a shock." Patrick, when called, corroborated Letitia's story, adding a touch of bravado. Fellow looked like a cheap crook, playing at being a bandit. Scared himself into pulling the trigger, I'd wager. His grin faded under Craddock's steady gaze. Julia Simmons was less forthcoming. "I was near the sofa when it happened," she said, her tone clipped. "It was dark, chaotic. I didn't see much." Her reticence drew a frown from the coroner, but he pressed no further. Philippa Hames, her voice barely audible, confirmed she'd been by the window, frozen during the shooting. "I didn't know what to do," she admitted, her eyes flickering to Letitia. Miss Marple noted the glance, wondering at its weight. Mitzi's absence left a gap. But Craddock summarized her statement. She'd been in the kitchen, heard the shots, and run to the drawing room, where she saw Scherz's body. Her claim of seeing a second figure in the dark was dismissed by the coroner as hysteria. Miss Hinchcliffe, called next, was blunt. "I was with Amy Miss Murgatroyd. The fire, heard the fellow yell, then the shots. Lights came on, and there he was, dead as mutton. Damned queer business." Miss Murgatroyd, trembling, added little, her voice quavering. "It was so dark and so loud. I just held on to Hinch." Colonel Easterbrook testified with military precision, describing the blackout and the torch's beam. "Seemed like a hold-up gone wrong," he said. "Chap panicked, shot himself." Laura Easterbrook, her auburn curls bouncing, was more theatrical. "It was ghastly. I thought we'd all be murdered." Her husband patted her hand, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Bunch, not called as a witness, leaned toward Miss Marple. "Laura's enjoying this a bit too much, don't you think?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Some people thrive on drama, my dear." Craddock took the stand last, his testimony methodical. Schurz, he explained, was a Swiss national with a record of petty theft. Employed as a clerk at the Royale Hotel. The revolver was unregistered, likely acquired on the black market. The fuse box at Little Paddocks had been tampered with, causing the blackout, though no fingerprints were found. The advertisement remained a mystery. The Gazette's editor confirmed it was placed anonymously, paid in cash. "We're treating this as a possible robbery attempt," Craddock concluded, though the motive is unclear. The coroner adjourned for deliberation, and the hall erupted into chatter. Villagers clustered in knots, their theories ranging from a jilted lover's revenge to a communist plot. Letitia, surrounded by sympathizers, accepted their murmurs with a wan smile. Dora clung to her arm, whispering, "You were so brave, Letty." Patrick and Julia stood apart, their heads bent in low conversation. Philippa slipped out, unnoticed by most, her coat drawn tightly round her. Miss Marple, lingering near the door, overheard snatches of talk. Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, opined that Schurz was mixed up with foreigners. The butcher's wife swore she'd seen him loitering near little paddocks days before. Miss Marple filed each tidbit away, her mind turning over the inquest's gaps. Scherz's death was no suicide, she was certain. The blackout, the shots, the advertisement, it was a performance, staged for a purpose. But whose, and why, had Letitia's ear been grazed, yet no one else harmed? Bunch, tugging her coat, interrupted her thoughts. "Come on, Aunt Jane, let's get tea at the Bluebird. This place is giving me the creeps." Miss Marple agreed, but her eyes lingered on Letitia, who was speaking to Craddock. The inspector's face was polite, but his questions were sharp, probing Letitia's movements before the blackout. Letitia's answers were smooth, yet Miss Marple sensed a guardedness, a careful choice of words. At the Bluebird Calf, a cozy establishment with gingham curtains and chipped teacups, Miss Marple and Bunch settled by the window. The village's gossip swirled around them, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. "Bunch, my dear," she said, stirring her tea, "what do you make of Miss Blacklock's household? They're an odd assortment, don't you think?" Bunch, biting into a scone, shrugged. "Patrick's a charmer, but a bit slippery. Julia's awfully clever, but standoffish. Poor Bunny's a dear, but scatty. And Philippa, well, she's like a ghost, isn't she? As for Mitzi, she's all nerves." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, and each has a role to play, I suspect. But it's the advertisement that troubles me most. It was meant to draw a crowd, to create confusion. Why?" Bunch frowned. "To cover up the shooting, maybe. Make it look like a game gone wrong." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, or perhaps it was to expose someone or to lure them into a trap. Their conversation was interrupted by Inspector Craddock, who joined them with a nod. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Harmon, mind if I sit?" He ordered coffee, his manner easy but his eyes keen. "You were at the inquest, Miss Marple. Any thoughts?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Only that it raises more questions than answers, Inspector. The young man's death seems convenient, and the fuse box tampered with, you said. That suggests planning, not impulse." Craddock leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on, Miss." Marple hesitated, choosing her words. "I wonder about the relationships in that house. Miss Blacklock is the centre, but the others, Patrick, Julia, Philippa, even Dora, they're not quite what they seem. And Mitzi's story of a second figure. It's dismissed, but suppose she's right." Craddock's brow lifted. "You think there was an accomplice?" Miss Marple smiled. "I think, Inspector, that someone wanted Rudy Schurz dead, and they used the advertisement to ensure it happened publicly. The question is, who benefited?" Craddock jotted a note, his respect for the old lady growing. "You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple. I'm digging into Scherz's past, his contacts, his debts, and I'm watching the household closely." He paused, then added, "Miss Blacklock's story holds up, but she's too calm for my liking, almost as if she expected trouble." Miss Marple nodded, saying nothing. She thought of the scarf, the scar it concealed, and the fleeting look in her eyes when Scherz's body was found. As Craddock left, Bunch sighed. "This is all too much for Chipping Cleghorn. Murders don't happen here. Miss Marple patted her hand. They happen everywhere, my dear, when greed or fear takes hold. We must watch and listen. The truth is there if we look closely. Her needles resumed their rhythm, but her mind was far from the cafe, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that grew darker with each passing day. Back at Little Paddocks, Letitia sat in the morning room, the Gazette folded beside her. Patrick and Julia argued in low tones, their voices carrying through the closed door. Dora, knitting clumsily, prattled about old friends, her words a nervous stream. Philippa, returning from the inquest, slipped upstairs without a word, and in the kitchen, Mitzi chopped onions with savage force, muttering about danger and betrayal. The house, so welcoming on the surface, simmered with secrets, and Miss Marple, miles away, felt their weight as surely as if she stood among them. Chapter 4. The household, the drizzle of the past days had given way to a brittle autumn sun, casting long shadows across chipping Cleghorn's lanes. Little Paddocks, its roses now shedding petals in the crisp air, seemed to hunker down, as if wary of the scrutiny it had endured since Rudy Scherz's death. The village, though still abuzz with theories, had resumed its rhythm's milk deliveries, church bell practice, the clatter of teacups at the Bluebird Cafe. Yet an undercurrent of unease lingered, like a note played just off-key. On the morning of November 3rd, Miss Jane Marple, her black coat buttoned against the chill, walked the short distance from the vicarage to Little Paddocks, her ostensible purpose to offer condolences, but her true aim far sharper. Miss Marple's mind, as ever, was a quiet whirl of observation. The inquest had clarified little, save that Scherz's death was no simple suicide. The tampered fuse box, the advertisement's anonymity, Letitia Blacklock's grazed ear-roll pointed to a design, though its shape eluded her. She had accepted Bunch Harmon's invitation to stay a few days longer, sensing that chipping Cleghorn held secrets that required her particular brand of unraveling. "It's the household that puzzles me," she had told Bunch over breakfast, her knitting needles pausing. "They're like pieces of a jigsaw, each with a place, but none fitting quite right." The gate to Little Paddocks creaked as Miss Marple pushed it open. The garden was tidy, its borders clipped, but a few late dahlias drooped, their vibrancy faded. She knocked, and the door was opened by Mitzi, the Hungarian maid, whose dark eyes widened at the sight of a visitor. "Miss Blacklock is in the morning room," Mitzi said, her accent thick, her apron askew, "but she is tired, yes, so much trouble in this house." Her voice rose, and Miss Marple, with a gentle smile, patted her arm. "I shan't stay long. My dear, just a word of sympathy." Mitzi muttered something about curses and led her inside. The morning room was bright, its windows overlooking the lawn. Letitia Blacklock sat at a writing desk, sorting letters, her dark dress relieved by a single pearl brooch. Her face, though pale, was composed, and she rose with a welcoming smile. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to call. Do sit down. Would you like tea?" Her voice was warm, but Miss Marple noted the faint lines of strain around her eyes, the way her fingers lingered on the desk's edge. "Thank you, yes," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "I felt I must come after such a shocking event." "You've borne it remarkably well, Miss Blacklock." Letitia's smile tightened slightly. "One must, I suppose. The police are thorough, but it's all so bewildering. The poor young man, I still can't imagine why he chose my house." Her words were smooth, yet Miss Marple sensed a careful selection, as if each had been weighed before spoken. Before she could reply, Dora Bunner bustled in, her floral scarf trailing. "Oh, Letty, I found those old photos you wanted, Miss Marple." Dora's grey curls bounced as she beamed. "How lovely to see you. Isn't it dreadful, all this? Poor Letty's been so brave." She sank onto the sofa, her hands fluttering. "We were just talking about old times, weren't we, Letty? When we worked for Mr. Godler in London. Such a grand man, though a bit stern." Letitia's eyes flicked. To Dora, a warning glance so brief, Miss Marple nearly missed it. "Bunny, dear, perhaps Miss Marple doesn't want to hear about ancient history." But Miss Marple leaned forward, her expression all innocent curiosity. "Oh, but I do. It must have been fascinating, working for a financier. Was it very demanding?" Dora, delighted, launched into a rambling tale of typewriters, ledgers, and Mr. Randall Godler's imposing office. "Letty was his right hand, you know," she said proudly. "So clever with figures, and he trusted her with everything. Left her a fortune, too, or so they say, though it's all tied up until, well, you know." She faltered, glancing at Letitia, who cut in smoothly. "Bunny, you exaggerate. It was just a job. Now, shall we have that tea?" Miss Marple filed away Dora's words. A fortune tied up Randall Godler's name was new and significant. She recalled village gossip about Letitia's comfortable means, but Dora's mention of a will suggested complexities. As Mitzi brought the tea tray, clattering cups with nervous energy, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the household. "You've quite a lively group here," she said. "Your cousins, and Mrs. Hames, and dear Miss Bunner. It must be a comfort, having company." Letitia poured tea, her movements precise. "Yes, it's never dull. Patrick and Julia keep me young, though they're a handful. Philippa's a quiet soul, and Bunny, well, she's my oldest friend." Her tone was fond, but Miss Marple caught a faint edge, as if the arrangement was less harmonious than she claimed. Dora, nibbling a biscuit, chimed in. "Patrick's such a tease, always joking. And Julia's so modern, always reading those clever books. But Philippa, she's sad, isn't she, Letty? Lost her husband in the war, poor thing." The door opened, and Patrick Simmons sauntered in, his tie loose and his grin irrepressible. "Morning, Aunt Letty. Hallo, Miss Marple. Come to join the circus." He dropped into a chair, stretching his long legs. "This house is like a stage play. Lately murder, police, the lot." Letitia's lips twitched. "Don't be flippant, Patrick. Miss Marple's been kind enough to call." Patrick winked at Miss Marple. "Sorry, ma'am. But you must admit, it's not every day we get a real-life mystery. Any theories?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Only that people are rarely what they seem, Mr. Simmons. You and your sister, for instance, you're not from Chipping Cleghorn, are you?" Patrick's grin didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Sharp one, aren't you?" "No, we're Londoners, more or less. Aunt Letty took us in when we were orphaned. Family duty, eh?" His tone was light, but Miss Marple sensed a practiced deflection. She nodded, letting the moment pass. Julia Simmons entered next, her tailored skirt and silk blouse a contrast to the room's faded charm. "Patrick, you're incorrigible," she said, her voice cool. "Miss Marple, I hope he's not boring you." She took a cup of tea, her movements graceful but deliberate, as if she were performing for an unseen audience. Miss Marple, sipping her own tea, remarked, "Not at all. I was just saying how interesting this household is. You must find village life quite different from London." Julia's smile was thin, It's quaint, but one adapts. Aunt Letty's been kind, though I suspect we're more trouble than we're worth. Her words were polite, but her eyes held a glint of irony. Miss Marple noted the tension between the siblings, Patrick's easy charm clashing with Julia's reserve. She wondered what lay beneath their polished surfaces. Philippa Hames slipped in quietly, her plain dress blending with the shadows. "Miss Blacklock, I'm off to the nursery," she said, her voice low. "Unless you need me." Letitia shook her head. "No, Philippa, go ahead. Thank you." Philippa nodded to Miss Marple and left, her footsteps soft on the parquet. Miss Marple watched her go, struck by her air of quiet desperation. A widow, Dora had said, but there was more to her story, she was sure. Mitzi reappeared, her face flushed. "Miss Blacklock, the butcher's boy says the village is talking, saying that man, that Schurz, was sent by someone. They say it was. No robbery?" Her voice rose to a wail, and Letitia stood, her tone firm. "Mitzi, that's nonsense. Go back to the kitchen, please." Mitzi fled, muttering, and Letitia sighed. "She's terribly excitable, Miss Marple. I hope she didn't alarm you." "Not at all," Miss Marple replied. "But she's not entirely wrong, is she? The village does talk, and there's truth in gossip, sometimes." She paused, then added gently, "That advertisement, for instance. It's curious, don't you think, that it brought so many people to your house at just the right moment?" Letitia's hand froze on her teacup, but her voice was steady. "Curious, yes, but I've no idea who placed it. A cruel joke, perhaps." Dora, oblivious to the undercurrent, prattled on. "It reminds me of that time in London, Letty, when Mr. Godler got that odd letter. You remember, all about his will." He laughed. "But you were worried." Letitia's eyes flashed. "Bunny, that's enough. Miss Marple doesn't need to hear about Mr. Godler." Dora subsided, chastened, and Miss Marple made a mental note. Godler's will again. Dora's ramblings were proving more valuable than she knew. The conversation turned to lighter matters, village events. The upcoming jumble sale, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. She observed the dynamics. Control, Dora's indiscretions, Patrick's deflections, Julia's wariness, Philippa's silence, Mitzi's nerves. Each was a thread in a tapestry she could not yet see whole. She thought of Schurz, a petty crook with no apparent connection to little Paddocks. Why had he been chosen? And why had Letitia, grazed by a bullet, escaped greater harm? As she rose to leave, Miss Marple paused by the fireplace, where a framed photograph showed a younger Letitia with a woman who resembled her closely. "Your sister?" she asked innocently. Letitia's smile was tight. "Yes, Charlotte. She died years ago, a delicate child, I'm afraid." Dora, hovering, added, "Oh, poor Lottie. She had that dreadful goiter, you know, kept her indoors. But so sweet." Letitia cut her off. "Bunny, do fetch my shawl, it's chilly." Dora scurried off, and Miss Marple, thanking Letitia for the tea, took her leave. Outside, the sun had dipped, and the air was sharp. Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind sifting details. Charlotte Blacklock, dead of a goiter, yet Dora's words suggested a closeness that lingered, and Godler's will, tied to Letitia's fortune, hinted at motives deeper than a botched robbery. She recalled the creaking door in the drawing room, unnoticed during the blackout. Someone had moved in the dark, she was certain. But who? Back at the vicarage, Bunch was peeling apples for a pie, her apron dusted with flour. "Well, Aunt Jane, did you solve the murder?" she teased. Miss Marple smiled, settling by the fire. Not yet, my dear, but I've learned a great deal. Miss Blacklock's household is like a village in miniature, full of secrets, and not all of them pleasant. She opened her notebook, jotting names: Letitia, Patrick, Julia, Philippa, Dora, Mitzi. Beside Letitia's, she wrote Charlotte, and underlined it. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the Bluebird Calf, where Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, held court. Over tea, she gleaned more about Letitia's past, a capable woman, never married, who had come to Chipping Cleghorn after the war with a modest but comfortable income. They say she worked for a rich man Godler, Mrs. Finch whispered. Left her a packet, but it's all in trust until his widow dies. Funny, isn't it, how money causes trouble? Miss Marple nodded, her expression vague but her mind alert. The widow, Belle Godler, was a name to pursue. She also learned of Patrick and Julia's arrival 2 years ago, their origins vague but their charm undeniable. Philippa, a war widow, worked at a nearby nursery. Her son boarded at a school up north. Dora, a fixture at Letitia's side, was pitied for her vagueness, but loved for her kindness. Mitzi, hired 6 months ago, was a source of amusement, her dramatics a village staple. Though she's been worse since the shooting, Mrs. Finch added. Says she saw Miss Blacklock with a gun that night. Stuff and nonsense, of course. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her thoughts circling Mitzi's claim. Hysteria, perhaps, but even lies held grains of truth. She recalled Letitia's scarf, the scar it hid, a goiter like Charlotte's, or something else. She made a note to speak to Inspector Craddock, who had promised to call at the vicarage. The puzzle was taking shape, but its heart remained elusive. At Little Paddocks, the afternoon passed uneasily. Letitia, alone in the morning room, stared at the photograph of herself and Charlotte, her fingers tracing the frame. Patrick and Julia, in the garden, spoke in low tones, their faces tense. Philippa, at the nursery, pruned roses with mechanical precision, her thoughts far away. Dora, in her room, sorted old letters, humming a tune from her youth. Mitzi, scrubbing pots, muttered prayers against evil. And in the village, Miss Marple walked on, her quiet steps belying the relentless workings of her mind, as she drew closer to the truth that lay hidden in the heart of Little Paddocks. Chapter 5. The Second Death. The November wind swept through Chipping Cleghorn, rattling windows and stripping the last leaves from the elms. Little Paddocks, its charm dimmed by recent events, stood resolute against the gusts, its chimneys trailing thin ribbons of smoke. The village, though still gripped by the mystery of Rudy Scherzer's death, had begun to settle into a wary routine. The Chipping Cleghorn Gazette carried no further advertisements, and the police presence had dwindled, though Inspector Craddock's quiet inquiries continued. Yet on the morning of November 7th, a new tragedy shattered the fragile calm, casting a darker shadow over Letitia Blacklock's household. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced at the vicarage with Bunch Harmon, had spent the days since her visit to Little Paddocks sifting through fragments of information. The household's dynamics: Letitia's poise, Patrick's charm, Julia's reserve, Philippa's reticence, Dora's indiscretions. Mitzi's nerves formed a pattern she could not yet fully discern. The mention of Randall Godler's will, with its promise of wealth tied to Letitia, and the shadowy figure of Charlotte Blacklock, supposedly dead, gnawed at her. She had shared her thoughts sparingly with Craddock, who valued her insight but pursued his own leads, particularly into Scherzer's connections at the Royale Hotel. That morning, Miss Marple sat by the vicarage fire, her knitting a pretext for the rapid workings of her mind. Bunch, bustling in with a tray of scones, noticed her aunt's distraction. "You're miles away, Aunt Jane," she said, setting the tray down, still thinking about little paddocks. Miss Marple's blue eyes flickered. "Yes, my dear. There's a thread I can't quite grasp. That advertisement tit was a lure, but for whom? And why was Miss Blacklock grazed, yet unharmed?" Bunch shivered. "It's creepy, isn't it? I wish you'd come back to St. Mary Mead and leave this mess to the police." Before Miss Marple could reply, a sharp knock interrupted them. Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, stood at the door, her face ashen beneath her woolen hat. "Oh, Mrs. Harmon, Miss Marple, it's dreadful," she gasped. "Miss Bunadora Bunner, she's dead. Collapsed in the lane near Little Paddocks, not an hour ago. Dr. Hargreaves is there now, but they're saying poison." Bunch's hand flew to her mouth, and Miss Marple's needles stilled. "Poison," she said softly. "Tell me everything, Mrs. Finch." The postmistress, breathless with the weight of her news, recounted the morning's events. Dora had left Little Paddocks after breakfast, ostensibly for a walk to clear her head. She was found by the milkman, sprawled near the gate, her face contorted, a bottle of aspirin clutched in her hand. Dr. Hargreaves, summoned at once, suspected cyanide, noting the bitter almond-like smell on her breath. The police were at Little Paddocks, and the village was in uproar, with whispers of murder replacing the earlier talk of robbery gone wrong. Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Finch and turned to Bunch, her expression grave. "This changes everything, my dear. Dora knew something dangerous. I must go to Little Paddocks," Bunch protested, but Miss Marple was already reaching for her coat. "Stay here," she instructed. "I'll telephone if I need you." With her black hat firmly pinned, she set out, her slight figure belying the steel in her purpose. Little Paddocks was a scene of subdued chaos. A police car stood by the gate, and a small crowd of villagers hovered, kept at bay by a constable. Inside, the drawing room was sombre, its curtains half drawn. Letitia Blacklock sat by the fire, her face drawn, a brandy glass in her hand. Patrick paced, his usual grin replaced by a scowl. Julia, perched on the sofa's arm, stared into the flames, her face unreadable. Philippa Hames, summoned from the nursery, stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly. Mitzi, red-eyed, darted in with a tray of coffee, her movements jerky. Inspector Craddock, his notebook open, was questioning Letitia when Miss Marple arrived. "Miss Marple," Craddock said, rising, "I didn't expect you." His tone was polite, but his eyes held a question. Letitia looked up, her voice weary. "You're kind to come, Miss Marple. It's too much. First that man, now poor Bunny." Her words trembled, but Miss Marple noted the careful way she held her glass, as if anchoring herself. "A terrible loss," Miss Marple said gently, taking a chair. "May I ask what happened?" Craddock, resuming his seat, summarized the facts. Dora had taken her usual walk after breakfast, carrying a bottle of aspirin for her chronic headaches. She collapsed near the gate, and the milkman's shout brought Mitzi running. Dr. Hargreaves confirmed cyanide poisoning, likely administered through the aspirin tablets found in the bottle. The bottle, now with the police, bore Dora's fingerprints and no others. "It looks like suicide," Craddock said, his voice neutral, "but I'm not convinced." Miss Bunner seemed distressed, but not despairing. Letitia shook her head. "Bunny was upset about the shooting, Inspector, but suicide? Never. She was too fond of life, even with her little troubles. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Patrick stopped pacing, his voice sharp. It's madness. Who'd want to kill Bunny? She was harmless, always nattering about. Old times. Julia glanced at him, her tone dry. Harmless, but not discreet. She talked too much, Patrick. He shot her a look, and Miss Marple filed the exchange away. Philippa, speaking for the first time, said softly, Miss Bunner was kind to me. She didn't deserve this. Her voice broke, and she turned to the window, her shoulders rigid. Mitzi, setting down the coffee, burst out, it is a curse. First the man with the gun, now Miss Bunner. I tell you, this house is evil. Letitia's voice cut through her outburst. Mitzi, enough. Go to the kitchen. Mitzi fled, sobbing, and Craddock raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Miss Marple, her hands folded, spoke quietly. Inspector, where was the aspirin bottle? Kept Craddock's eyes sharpened. In Miss Bunner's room, on her bedside table. She used it often, according to Miss Blacklock. Letitia nodded. Bunny had headaches, especially since the shooting. The bottle was always there. Miss Marple tilted her head, and anyone in the house could have accessed it. Craddock nodded slowly. Yes. The door wasn't locked. The implication hung in the air. Patrick muttered, that's a cheery thought. Julia's lips twitched, but she remained silent. Miss Marple's mind raced. Cyanide was not obtained, but its use suggested intent, not impulse. Dora's death was no accident, she was certain. She recalled Dora's ramblings about Randall Godler, the will, and Charlotte Blacklock. Had Dora stumbled onto a secret worth killing for? Craddock turned to Letitia. Miss Blacklock, can you account for your movements this morning? Letitia met his gaze. I was here, Inspector. After breakfast, I wrote letters in the morning room. Bunny went for her walk around 9. I didn't see her leave. Patrick, Julia, and Philippa offered similar accounts. Patrick had been reading in the garden, Julia writing letters in her room, Philippa at the nursery until summoned. Mitzi, in the kitchen, claimed to have seen nothing until the milkman's cry. Miss Marple listened, her expression mild but her thoughts sharp. The alibis were vague, the household's routines loose. She glanced at the fireplace, where the photograph of Letitia and Charlotte still stood. The scar on Letitia's neck, glimpsed during her last visit, nagged at her, a goiter like Charlotte's, or a surgical mark, hinting at a deeper deception. She resolved to probe further, but discreetly. Craddock, closing his notebook, addressed, the room I'll need to search Miss Bunner's room and interview everyone again. This is now a murder investigation. Letitia's hand tightened on her glass, but she nodded. Patrick swore under his breath, and Julia's eyes narrowed. Philippa remained still, her face a mask. Miss Marple, rising, said, I won't intrude further, Miss Blacklock. But if I may, I'd like to see Miss Bunner's room later, with the inspector's permission. Sometimes small things speak loudly. Craddock, intrigued, agreed. You're welcome to look, Miss Marple. Your eye for detail is remarkable. As Miss Marple left, she passed Mitzi in the hall, scrubbing the floor with furious energy. Miss, Mitzi whispered, glancing around. I saw something, that night of the shooting. A shadow moving by the door. Not the man with the gun, someone else. Her eyes were wide with fear. Miss Marple patted her hand. Tell the inspector, my dear, and don't be afraid. Mitzi nodded, but her trembling suggested little comfort. Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple found Bunch in the kitchen, her face Anxious? Is it true, Aunt Jane? Poison? Miss Marple nodded, settling by the fire. Yes, and it's no coincidence. Dora Bunner was silenced. I'm sure of it. She knew something about Miss Blacklock's past, perhaps about this girl. Will or Charlotte? Bunch shivered. But who would do such a thing? Letitia's so respectable. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Respectability, my dear, is often a mask. We must look beneath it. That afternoon, Miss Marple joined Craddock at Little Paddock's to examine Dora's room. It was a cosy space, cluttered with faded photographs, old novels, and a sewing basket. The bedside table held a glass of water and a few scattered aspirin tablets, the bottle now with the police. Miss Marple's eyes roamed, pausing on a small diary tucked under a lace doily. With Craddock's permission, she opened it. The entries were mundane village events. Weather, headaches but one, dated the day before the shooting, caught her. Attention, Letty's scar worries me. Like Lottie's, but how? Must ask her. Miss Marple showed it to Craddock, who frowned. Charlotte Blacklock, you think? Miss Marple nodded. Possibly. Dora's memories were muddled, but they held truth. Craddock shared his latest findings. Cyanide was used at the nursery where Philippa worked, for pest control. She had access, he said, though no motive I can see. Miss Marple tilted her head. Motive is often hidden, Inspector. Philippa's quiet, but that doesn't mean she's innocent. Or it could be someone else, using her access. Craddock nodded, his respect for her growing. I'm checking everyone's movements. And Schurzy had a contact at the Royale, a woman who's vanished. I'm tracing her. As they left the room, Miss Marple glanced back, her mind turning over Dora's diary. The scar, the will, the shadow. Mitzi saw pieces of a puzzle, but incomplete. She thought of Letitia's composure, so at odds with the violence around her. Was she victim or orchestrator? And what of Patrick and Julia, whose pasts were so vague? Philippa's despair, Mitzi's fear held a clue, if she could find the thread that bound them. In the village, gossip swirled. At the Bluebird Calf, Mrs. Finch told anyone who'd listen that Dora had been too nosy for her own good. The butcher's wife claimed Letitia was hiding a fortune, and where there's money, there's murder. Miss Marple, stopping for tea, listened without comment, her mind elsewhere. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a seemingly random death had unravelled a web of greed. Chipping Cleghorn, she suspected, was no different. That evening, at Little Paddock's, the household gathered in the drawing room, their faces strained. Letitia, pouring sherry, spoke of Dora with quiet grief. Patrick, subdued, drank heavily. Julia read, her eyes barely moving over the page. Philippa, excused early, retired to her annex. Mitzi, serving dinner, dropped a plate, her nerves frayed. And in the vicarage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, as she pieced together the fragments of a truth that grew more sinister with each passing hour. Chapter 6. The past unravelled. The November days grew shorter in Chipping Cleghorn, the sun a pale disk behind scudding clouds. Little Paddocks, once a beacon of village hospitality, now seemed to draw its curtains against prying eyes. The deaths of Rudy Schurz and Dora Bunner had cast a pall over the community. Their names whispered in the butcher's queue and the church porch. The villagers, though eager for answers, sensed a deeper malaise, as if the cottage on the lane held secrets too heavy for gossip to unravel. Miss Jane Marple, her stay at the vicarage, extended by an unspoken agreement with Bunch Harmon, felt the weight of those secrets keenly. Her visits to little paddocks and her quiet chats at the Bluebird Cafe had sharpened her suspicions, and Dora's death, so starkly deliberate, had set her mind on a new course. On the morning of November 9th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage parlour, a cup of tea cooling beside her. Her knitting lay in her lap, a pretext for the intricate workings of her thoughts. The household at Little Paddock's Letitia Blacklock's poised control. Patrick Simmons' slippery charm, Julia's guarded wit, Philippa Hames' silent despair, Mitzi's fearful outbursts formed a mosaic of motives and masks. Diary, with its cryptic note about Letitia's scar and Charlotte Blacklock, had stirred a theory Miss Marple dared not yet voice. The mention of Randall Godler's will, tied to a fortune, suggested a motive as old as time, greed. But the advertisement, the blackout, the cyanide all pointed to a plan both audacious and precise. Bunch, bustling in with a plate of toast, broke her reverie. "Aunt Jane, you're brooding again. What's on your mind now, Miss Marple's?" Blue eyes twinkled, though her expression was grave. "I'm thinking, my dear, of the past. It has a way of reaching into the present, especially where money is concerned. Miss Blacklock's history, her work with Mr. Godler, her sister Charlotte, it's the key, I'm sure." Bunch frowned, spreading marmalade. "But Charlotte's dead, isn't she? And Godler's just a name from Dora's stories." Miss Marple shook her head slightly. "Names, my dear, are never just names. They're threads, and I mean to follow them." Her first step was a visit to the vicarage's telephone, where she placed a discreet call to an old friend, Miss Hartnell, a spinster in St. Mary Mead with a knack for ferreting out genealogical details. "I need information on Randall God." "A financier and his family," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. "Particularly his will, and any mention of Letitia or Charlotte Blacklock." Miss Hartnell, delighted by the challenge, promised to consult her network of correspondents, many of whom had connections in London's financial circles. "Give me a day or two, Jane," she said. "I'll dig up something." Next, Miss Marple walked to the post office, where Mrs. Finch, ever eager to share news, was sorting letters. "Morning, Miss Marple," she called, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Heard the latest. They say Miss Bunner's aspirin was tampered with cyanide. Right in her room. Makes you wonder who's next." Miss Marple nodded, her expression suitably shocked. "Dreadful, Mrs. Finch. Tell me, what do people say about Miss Blacklock's past? She came here after the war, didn't she?" Mrs. Finch leaned over the counter, her voice low. "Oh yes. Worked for a big man in London, Godler, they say. Left her money, but it's locked up till his widow passes. Some say she's got secrets, though her and that scar she hides. Makes you think, don't it?" Miss Marple thanked her, filing away the confirmation of Godler's will. The scar, mentioned again, was no coincidence. She recalled Letitia's high collars, the scarf that slipped during her visit. A goiter, like Charlotte's or something. Else, she made a mental note to examine the photograph in the drawing room more closely, if she could. Her next stop was the Bluebird Cafe, where the morning crowd offered a rich vein of gossip. Over tea, she listened as the butcher's wife recounted Letitia's arrival in Chipping Cleghorn, all proper and quiet, but with a look in her eye, like she'd seen things. A farmer's widow mentioned Patrick and Julia, orphans, they say, but too polished for that story. Philippa Hames, another said, was poor as a church mouse, working at that nursery to keep her boy in school. Mitzi's dramatics were a favourite topic, her claim of a shadow during the shooting dismissed as foreign nerves. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting truth from embellishment. By noon, she had a clearer picture. Letitia's wealth, though modest now, was tied to Godler's estate, which would pass to her if Belle Godler, his widow, died. Dora's death suggested she had stumbled onto a truth, perhaps about Letitia's identity or the will's terms. Miss Marple's theory, still forming, hinged on Charlotte Blacklock. If Charlotte had not died, could she be posing as Letitia, securing the inheritance? The scar was a clue, but she needed more. That afternoon, Miss Marple called on Inspector Craddock at the police station, a small building with a single cell and a perpetually dripping tap. Craddock, poring over reports, welcomed her with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, I'm beginning to expect you. What's on your mind?" She settled into a chair, her black bag on her lap. "I've been thinking, Inspector, about Miss Blacklock's past. Have you looked into Randall Godler's will? It seems central to this affair." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You're ahead of me. I've got a copy coming from London. Godler left his fortune to Letitia Blacklock, but only after his widow, Belle, dies. If Letitia predeceases Belle, it goes to Pip and Emma, the children of Godler's estranged sister, Sonia. Problem is, no one knows where they are." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Pip and Emma," she murmured. "Curious names. And Miss Blacklock's sister, Charlotte, her death is certain." Craddock shrugged. "According to records, she died in Switzerland, 1930s. Goiter complications." "Why?" Miss Marple hesitated, then said, "Dora Booner's diary mentioned a scar on Letitia. Like Charlotte's, it's a small thing, but it troubles me." Craddock jotted a note. "I'll check the records again. But scars can be coincidence, you know?" Their conversation turned to Dora's death. The cyanide, Craddock confirmed, was identical to that used at the nursery where Philippa worked. "She's got no alibi for the morning Dora died," he said, "but no motive either. She's a widow, scraping by. Why kill Dora?" Miss Marple tilted her head. Perhaps she was coerced, or protecting someone. Or perhaps the cyanide came from elsewhere, and her work is a convenient distraction. Craddock leaned back, impressed. "You don't miss much." "Do you?" "I'm also looking at Scherz's contacts. He was seen with a woman at the Royale, a typist who's gone missing. Might be nothing, but I'm digging." Miss Marple thanked him and left, her mind buzzing. Pip and Emma could. They be in Chipping Cleghorn, disguised as members of the household. Patrick and Julia, with their vague origins, were possibilities. She recalled their banter, so like siblings, yet tinged with an undercurrent of secrecy. And Letitia Scarif, Charlotte had survived. Could she have assumed her sister's identity? The will's terms suggested a fortune worth killing for, but the advertisement's purpose remained elusive. That evening, Miss Marple returned. 2 little Paddocks, invited by Letitia for a quiet supper. The household was subdued, Dora's absence a palpable void. Letitia, in a dark green dress, greeted her warmly, though her eyes were shadowed. "You're a comfort, Miss Marple," she said, leading her to the dining room. We're all still, reeling. Patrick, pouring wine, managed a half-hearted jest. "Here's to quieter evenings, eh?" Julia, in a simple blouse, said little, her gaze flickering to Letitia. Philippa, joining them late, ate sparingly, her face pale. Mitzi served, with trembling hands, her usual outbursts quelled by grief. Over soup, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the past. "Miss Blacklock, Dora spoke so fondly of your time with Mr. Godler. It must have been a fascinating world." Letitia Spoon paused. It was demanding, she said carefully. Randall was a brilliant man, but particular. I managed his office, nothing more. Julia, cutting her bread, remarked, "Sounds tedious." "All those ledgers," Patrick chuckled. "Aunt Lettie's too modest. She ran the show, didn't you?" Letitia's smile was tight. "Hardly. It was work, not glamour." Miss Marple, undeterred, mentioned Charlotte. Dora said, "Your sister was delicate. It must have been hard, losing her so young." Letitia's hand tightened on her glass. "Yes, it was. Charlotte was frail. She didn't suffer long, thankfully." Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the photograph on the sideboard. She made a point to examine it later, noting the striking resemblance between the sisters, though Charlotte's face was softer, her neck concealed by a high collar. Philippa, speaking softly, changed the subject. "Miss Marple, do you think the police will find who killed Dora?" Her eyes were earnest, almost pleading. Miss Marple patted her hand. "I'm sure they will, my dear. Truth has a way of surfacing." She watched Philippa's reaction, wondering at her intensity. Was it fear or guilt? After supper, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing-room, where the creaking door caught her eye. She tested it, noting its faint squeak, audible only in the quiet. During the blackout, it could have been used unnoticed. She also studied the fuse box in the hall, its cover slightly ajar, as Craddock had described. Tampering required knowledge someone familiar with the house. Her thoughts were interrupted by Mitzi, who whispered, "Miss, I hear things at night, footsteps, in the hall. Someone is watching." Miss Marple soothed her, but the maid's fear was another piece of the puzzle. Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple received a call from Miss Hartnell. "Jane, I've got something," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "Godler's will, dated 1940, leaves his estate to Letitia Blacklock after Belle Godler's death. If Letitia dies first, it goes to Pip and Emma, Sonia Godler's twins. No trace of them since the war. Sonia was a bit wild, ran off with a foreigner, and Charlotte Blacklock's death certificate from a Swiss clinic is real, but the clinic burned down in '39, so records are spotty." Miss Marple thanked her, her theory solidifying. A missing twin, a fortune, a possible imposter the strands were weaving together. She shared her findings with Craddock the next morning, meeting him at the police station. "Inspector, suppose Charlotte Blacklock didn't die. Suppose she took Letitia's place to secure the inheritance. The scar, Dora's doubts it fits." Craddock rubbed his chin. "It's a stretch, but not impossible. I'll check Belle Godler's status. She's frail, living in Scotland, and I'm watching Patrick and Julia. Their stories, thin orphans, my foot. They could be Pip and Emma, or know who is." Miss Marple nodded. "And the advertisement tit was a trap, I think, to draw out someone or to stage Scherz's death publicly. But why?" Craddock had no answer, but his respect for Miss Marple deepened. "You're building a case, aren't you? Keep me posted." She smiled, her eyes sharp. "I will, Inspector, but we must tread carefully. The killer is close, and they're not done." In little paddocks, the day passed tensely. Letitia, sorting Dora's belongings, paused over a letter from Godler's widow. Its contents innocuous, but its presence telling. Patrick and Julia, in the garden, argued in hushed tones, their faces strained. Philippa, at the nursery, handled cyanide with gloved hands, her thoughts dark. Mitzi, scrubbing floors, prayed for deliverance. And Miss Marple, back at the vicarage, opened her notebook, adding Pip and Emma, beside Patrick and Julia's names, as the past unraveled, revealing a truth as dangerous as it was near. Chapter 7. The Alibis. The November chill had settled over Chipping Cleghorn, frosting the hedgerows and glazing the cobblestones with a sheen of ice. Little Paddocks, its windows shuttered against the cold, seemed to shrink into itself, as if guarding its secrets from the village's relentless scrutiny. The deaths of Rudy Schurz and Dora Bunner had woven a web of suspicion, and the villagers, though outwardly resuming their routines, cast sidelong glances at the cottage on the lane. Whispers of poison and hidden fortunes filled the air, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Miss Jane Marple, her stay at the vicarage now a fixture, felt the pulse of this unease, her mind a quiet engine piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that grew more intricate with each revelation. On the morning of November 11th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's cosy parlour, her knitting a soft rhythm against the crackle of the fire. The past days had sharpened her theory. Letitia Blacklock might be Charlotte, masquerading to secure Randall Gordler's fortune, with Dora's murder a desperate act to silence her suspicions. The mysterious Pip and Emma, heirs if Letitia Belle Godler could be Patrick and Julia Simmons, their vague origins a clue to their true identities. The advertisement, the blackout, the cyanide all suggested a scheme both bold and ruthless. Yet the motive for Scherz's death and the precise role of each household member remained elusive. Bunch Harmon, stirring porridge in the kitchen, called out, "Aunt Jane, you're awfully quiet." Plotting to catch the killer. Miss Marple lips twitched. "Merely thinking, my dear. The alibis at Little Paddocks there, too convenient, too loose. I suspect someone is lying, and lies, like stitches, unravel with a gentle tug." Bunch appeared in the doorway, her apron dusted with flour. "You're scarier than the police, you know that. What's next?" Grilling Letitia over tea. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Not quite, but I do intend to speak with Inspector Craddock. He's re-interviewing the household today, and I'd like to observe." Her opportunity came sooner than expected. Craddock telephoned, inviting her to join him at Little Paddocks for the interviews. "Your insights are uncanny, Miss Marple," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. "I'd value your presence, if you can spare the time." Miss Marple, adjusting her hat, replied, "I always have time for the truth, Inspector." She set out, her black coat buttoned against the wind, her mind alert to the nuances of human behavior she knew would surface under pressure. Little Paddocks was a study in tension when she arrived. The drawing room, where Schurz had died, was warmed by a fire, but its atmosphere was frigid. Letitia Blacklock sat by the window, her dark dress stark against the pale curtains, her hands folded with deliberate calm. Patrick Simmons sprawled in an armchair, his tie askew, a glass of whiskey in hand, despite the early hour. Julia, in a tailored skirt, stood by the sideboard, her grey eyes scanning the room like a hawk's. Philippa Hames, summoned from the nursery, perched on the sofa's edge, her fair hair pulled back tightly. Mitzi, serving coffee, moved with the jerky precision of a marionette, her face pale. Craddock, his notebook open, stood by the fireplace, his mild demeanour belying the sharpness of his questions. Miss Marple, slipping in quietly, took a chair. Near the door, her presence barely noted. She observed Letitia's posture erect, yet with a faint tremor in her hands. Patrick's nonchalance seemed forced, his glances at Julia frequent and uneasy. Julia's coolness masked a coiled alertness, as if she anticipated a trap. Philippa's silence was a shield, her eyes fixed on her clasped hands. Mitzi's nerves were palpable, her tray rattling as she set it down. The creaking door, Miss Marple noted, was closed but unlatched, its hinges gleaming with recent oiler, detail that pricked her curiosity. Craddock began with Letitia, his tone polite but probing. "Miss Blacklock, let's revisit the night of October 29th. You were by the sideboard when the lights went out, correct?" Letitia nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, Inspector. I was pouring sherry. Then the blackout, the man's voice, the shots. It was all so sudden." Craddock leaned forward. "And your movements that morning, can you clarify? You said you were in the garden, checking the roses, before the guests arrived." Letitia's eyes met his. "Exactly so. I came in around 5, changed, and greeted everyone as they arrived." Her account was precise, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple wondered at its polish. Patrick was next, his tone flippant, but his eyes wary. "I was chatting with Laura Easterbrook, trying to keep her from flirting with me," he said, grinning. "When the lights went out, I ducked behind the sofa instinct, you know. Heard the shots, then saw Schurz dead when the lights came back." Craddock pressed him. "And that morning, you were in the village, you said, at the post office." Patrick shrugged. "Yeah, picking up stamps. Back by noon, loafed around till the party." His casualness rang hollow, and Miss Marple noted his quick glance at Julia, as if seeking her approval. Julia's account was succinct, her voice cool. "I was near the fire, talking to Bunch Harmon. The blackout caught me off guard. I stayed. Heard the shots, and saw the body when the lights returned." "That's all." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "And your morning, you were in your room, writing letters?" Julia nodded. "Yes, until lunch. Then I helped Mitzi set up for the evening." Her brevity was a wall, and Miss Marple sensed a deliberate withholding, as if Julia feared saying too much. Pa, her voice barely audible, confirmed she was by the window during the shooting, frozen in shock. "I didn't move," she said, her eyes flickering to Letitia. "It was so dark, so loud." Her morning had been spent at the nursery, pruning shrubs, returning to little paddocks only for the gathering. Craddock's questions about the cyanide at her workplace drew a faint flush to her cheeks. "It's kept locked," she said. "I've never touched it." Her denial was earnest, but Miss Marple wondered at her nervousness, as if she carried a burden beyond her words. Mitzi, called last, was a torrent of emotion. "I was in the kitchen, Inspector, when the lights went out. I hear the man shout. The bangs, and I run to the door. I see him dead, and Dan a shadow moving by the other door." Her voice rose to a wail, and Craddock's patience thinned. "This shadow again, Mitzi. Can you describe it?" She shook her head, tears spilling. No, just a shape, quick, like a ghost. I tell you, Miss Blacklock, she knows something. She had a gun that night. I saw it." Letitia stood, her voice sharp. "Mitzi, that's enough. You're hysterical." Mitzi fled, sobbing, and Craddock sighed, closing his notebook. Miss Marple, silent until now, spoke softly. "Inspector, might I ask about the fuse box? You said it was tampered with. Could it have been done during the day, before the gathering?" Craddock nodded. "Possible. It's in the hall, accessible to anyone. In the house, no prints, though wiped clean." Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the creaking door, now oiled, and she wondered if its squeak had been deliberate, to mask a movement in the dark dot. As Craddock prepared to leave, Miss Marple lingered, approaching. "Letitia, Miss Blacklock, I couldn't help overhearing Mitzi. She's terribly frightened. Do you think she saw something real? Letitia's smile was strained. She's imaginative, Miss Marple. The shock has unhinged her. I assure you, I had no gun. Her denial was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way her hand touched her scarf, covering the scar on her neck, a gesture she had seen before. Outside, Miss Marple walked with Craddock to his car, the wind biting her cheeks. Those alibis, Inspector, she said. They're like a quilt with loose seams. Patrick and Julia are too vague, Philip are too nervous, and Letitia, her story is perfect, but perfection is suspicious. Craddock chuckled. You're relentless, aren't you? I'm checking their backgrounds. Patrick and Julia claim to be orphans, but their records are spotty. Philippa's clean, but her access to cyanide worries me. And Mitzi's, not dismissing it, but she's unreliable. Miss Marple nodded. Unreliable, perhaps, but fear makes people see clearly, sometimes. I'd like to examine the drawing room again, if I may. Craddock agreed, and they returned to Little Paddock's. The drawing room was, as it had been, save for a faint smell of polish. Miss Marple studied the creaking door, now silent, its hinges gleaming. She opened it, noting its view of the hall and the fuse box beyond. Someone could have slipped out here, she murmured, during the blackout, and back again unnoticed. Craddock frowned. But why? To shoot Shahs, or to miss Letitia deliberately? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, or to ensure the shots were fired at all. This was a performance, Inspector, and the door was part of the stage. She moved to the sideboard where Letitia had stood and traced the path of the bullet that grazed her ear. The hole in the panelling was high, suggesting a wild shot, or a calculated one. She recalled Mitzi's claim of a gun in Letitia's hand, dismissed as fantasy but nagging at her. Could Letitia have fired, staging her own injury? The thought was audacious, but Miss Marple had seen stranger truths in St. Mary Mead. Back at the vicarage, she shared her observations with Bunch, who was icing a cake. Aunt Jane, you're saying someone in that house is a murderer, aren't you? But who? Letitia's so proper. Miss Marple's needles clicked. Propriety, my dear, is often a disguise. I suspect Letitia or someone posing as her knows more than she admits. The scar, Dora's doubts, the will it all point to a deception, perhaps years old. Bunch shivered. You're giving me goosebumps. What's next? Miss Marple smiled. I wait, my dear. The killer is watching, and they'll slip, sooner or later. That evening, Miss Marple visited the Bluebird Calf, where gossip flowed as freely as the tea. Mrs. Finch, serving scones, shared a new tidbit. Miss Hinchcliffe had seen a stranger near Little Paddocks the night of the shooting, lurking by. The hedge, bold as brass. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning to this new figure. A stranger, or someone known, disguised. She recalled Craddock's mention of a missing typist from the Royale, possibly linked to The threads were multiplying, but the pattern was clearer. At Little Paddocks, the household dined in silence, the weight of Dora's death heavy. Letitia, carving lamb, spoke of moving forward, but her eyes were wary. Patrick, nursing a whiskey, avoided Julia's gaze. Julia, picking at her food, seemed lost in thought. Philippa, excused early, retreated to her annex, her face haunted. Mitzi, clearing plates, muttered about shadows and curses, and in the vicarage, Miss Marple opened her notebook, adding, stranger, beside the creaking door, as the alibis of Little Paddocks began to fray, revealing glimpses of a truth as cold and sharp as the November frost. Chapter 8. The Imposter. The November frost had tightened its grip on Chipping Cleghorn, rimming the windows of little paddocks with delicate patterns that belied the tension within. The village, though outwardly bustling with preparations for the winter fair, simmered with unease, its collective gaze fixed on the cottage where Rudy Schurz and Dora Bunner had met their ends. The air was thick with speculation, poisoned aspirin, a staged shooting. A fortune in the balance, and the villagers, from the postmistress to the publican, wove theories as intricate as the frost itself. Miss Jane Marple, her presence at the vicarage, now a quiet anchor, felt the pulse of this disquiet, her mind a ceaseless weave of clues and conjectures. On the morning of November 13th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's snug parlour, a shawl draped over her shoulders against the chill. Her knitting, a soft pile of lavender wool, lay untouched, her thoughts consumed by the enigma of little paddocks. The alibis of Letitia Blacklock's household, too vague, too polished, had deepened her suspicions. Her theory, shared cautiously with Inspector Craddock, was bold. Letitia might be Charlotte Blacklock, masquerading as her sister to claim Randall Godler's fortune. Dora's murder, she believed, was to silence her growing doubts, and Schoz's death a calculated act to eliminate a threat, perhaps a blackmailer who knew the truth. The mysterious Pip and Emma Godler's heirs could be Patrick and Julia Simmons, their evasive pasts a clue to their true identities. Yet the advertisement's purpose and the creaking door's role in the blackout remained puzzles within the puzzle. Bunch Harmon, polishing the silver, glanced at her aunt. "You're scheming again, Aunt Jane. I can tell by that look." Was next a trap for the murderer? Miss Marple's blue eyes twinkled, though her expression was grave. "Not a trap, my dear, but a test. Lies are like shadows, they shift under light. I mean to shine a light on little paddocks." Bunch shivered, setting down a spoon. "You're braver than I am. That house gives me the creeps now. Poor Dora, and that Schurz fellow, it's all so sinister." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Sinister, yes, but human. Greed and fear are old stories, and I've read them before." Her plan began with a visit to Inspector Craddock at the police station, where the air smelled of ink and damp coats. Craddock, sifting through telegrams from London, greeted her with a wry smile. "Miss Marple, I'm half expecting you to solve this before I do. What's on your mind?" She settled into a creaking chair, her black bag on her lap. "Inspector, I believe we're dealing with an imposter. Letitia Blacklock may be Charlotte, living as her sister to secure Godler's inheritance. Diary, her murder, the scar on Letitia's neck, it all points to a deception, perhaps decades old." Craddock leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "That's a tall order, but it fits the pieces. I've got Belle Godler's statement, she's frail, in Scotland, confirms the will's terms. Letitia gets the lot unless she dies first, then it's Pip and Emma. No trace of them, though." Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft but firm. "Patrick and Julia Simmons, they're my candidates for Pip and Emma. Their story is too thin, their arrival too convenient. And sure, suppose he knew Charlotte's secret, perhaps from his time at the Royale. The advertisement could have been her way to stage his death, publicly, to silence him." Craddock jotted a note, impressed. "You're building a case, aren't you? I've got something new. The typist from the Royale, seen with Schurz, was spotted in London, using a false name. I'm tracking her, and the cyanide, it's definitely from the nursery, but Philippa's prints aren't on the bottle. Someone's clever." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Clever, yes, but not infallible. I'd like to see the drawing room again, Inspector, and speak to Mitzi. Her fear is genuine, and fear often sees what others miss. Craddock agreed, arranging for her to visit Little Paddocks that afternoon. As she left, he called after her, "Be careful, Miss Marple. If you're right, this impostor's dangerous." She smiled, her eyes sharp. "I always am, Inspector." Little Paddocks was hushed when Miss Marple arrived, the frost on its windows like a veil. Mitzi opened the door, her dark eyes wide. "Miss Marple, you come again? This house, it is full of ghosts." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple soothed her, following her to the drawing room. Letitia Blacklock was there, arranging flowers, her dark dress relieved by a single cameo. "Miss Marple, what a surprise," she said, her smile warm but her eyes wary. "I'm afraid we're rather subdued today." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Quite understandable, Miss Blacklock. I only wanted to see how you're managing and perhaps have a word with Mitzi." Letitia's smile tightened. "Mitzi's in the kitchen, as usual. She's been impossible since Dora's death." She led Miss Marple to the kitchen where Mitzi was peeling potatoes with savage force. "Mitzi, Miss Marple wishes to speak." "With you," Letitia said, then withdrew. Mitzi's hands shook, but she met Miss Marple's gaze. "Miss, I tell the police, but they do not listen. That night I saw a shadow by the door, the creaking one. And Miss Blacklock, she moved in. The dark, I swear it." Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "What did you see, exactly, my dear?" Mitzi hesitated, then whispered, her hand holding something metal, shining, like a gun. Then the lights went out. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. Mitzi's story, though muddled by fear, supported her theory. If Letitia Charlotte had fired the shots, grazing her own ear, it explained the precision of the blackout. But why? To eliminate Schurz, or to stage a threat, deflecting suspicion? She returned to the drawing room, where Letitia was joined by Patrick and Julia. Patrick, lounging by the fire, grinned. "Back to sleuth, Miss Marple. You'll have us all confessing soon." Julia, sorting letters, shot him a look. "Don't be absurd, Patrick. Miss Marple's only being kind." Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair. "Kindness, Mr. Simmons, often sees what haste misses. I was wondering about your time in London before you came here. It must have been quite different from Chipping Cleghorn." Patrick's grin faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, the usual parties, clubs, scraping by. Aunt Letty rescued us, didn't she, Jules?" Julia nodded, her voice cool. "She did. Village life's dull, but it's home now." Their answers were slick, but Miss Marple sensed a rehearsed quality, as if they feared scrutiny. Philippa Hames entered, her coat damp from the nursery. "Miss Blacklock, I've finished early," she said, her voice low. "Shall I help with supper?" Letitia nodded, and Philippa glanced at Miss Marple, her eyes guarded. Miss Marple, seizing the moment, remarked, "Mrs. Hames, you must find the nursery work a solace after your loss. But it's demanding, isn't it, handling chemicals like cyanide?" Philippa's hands clenched. "It's locked away, Miss Marple. I've never used it." Her denial was fierce, and Miss Marple wondered at its intensity, fear, or something deeper. As the others dispersed, Miss Marple examined the drawing room, her eyes lingering on the creaking door, now silent, with its oiled hinges. She tested it, noting its view of the hall and the fuse box. The bullet hole in the panelling, high above the sideboard, suggested a shot aimed to Mysore, to graze deliberately. She recalled the photograph of Letitia and Charlotte, their faces so alike, Charlotte's neck hidden by a collar. The scar on Letitia's neck, glimpsed beneath her scarf, was no coincidence, she was sure. That evening, Miss Marple confided in Craddock, meeting him at the vicarage. "Inspector, I'm convinced Letitia is Charlotte, posing as her sister. The scar, Dora's diary, Mitzi's, shadow it, all fits. Schurz knew her secret, perhaps from his Swiss connections, and she staged the shooting to silence him, injuring herself to play the victim." Craddock rubbed his chin. "It's plausible, but we need proof. I've got a lead on Charlotte's death certificate. It's genuine, but the clinic's records are incomplete. And Patrick and Julia, I'm checking their birth records. If they're Pip and Emma, they've a motive to expose Letitia, or to kill for the fortune." Miss Marple nodded. The advertisement was the key. It drew a crowd, ensuring Scherz's death was public, perhaps to confuse or to trap someone. But Dora's murder, she saw the truth, I'm sure. Her talk of the scar, of Godler's willet, was too dangerous. Craddock leaned forward. "So what's your next move?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A confrontation, Inspector. Not direct, but enough to shake the impostor. If we hint at Charlotte's survival, publicly, she may falter." They devised a plan. Craddock would question Letitia at the village hall, inviting key witnesses, Patrick, Julia, Philippa, Mitzi, and the Easterbrook under the guise of clarifying alibis. Miss Marple would attend, watching for reactions. "We'll mention Charlotte," Craddock said, "and see who flinches." Miss Marple agreed, adding, "And Mitzi, she must repeat her story of the shadow, the gun. It may provoke a slip." Next day, the village hall was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Craddock stood at the front, his manner calm but authoritative. Letitia, in a dark coat, sat with composed dignity, her scarf high. Patrick and Julia, side by side, exchanged glances. Philippa, pale, kept her eyes down. Mitzi, trembling, clutched a handkerchief. Colonel Easterbrook, his moustache bristling, sat with Laura, whose green dress drew eyes. Miss Marple, near the back, blended into the crowd, her notebook hidden in her shawl. Craddock began, reviewing the shooting and Dora's death. "We've new information," he said, his voice carrying. "Miss Bunner's diary mentioned a scar on Miss Blacklock, similar to her sister Charlotte's. We're investigating whether Charlotte Blacklock, believed dead, may have survived." A gasp rippled through the room. Letitia's face paled, her hand touching her scarf, but she said nothing. Patrick's jaw tightened, and Julia's eyes narrowed. Philippa's head jerked up, her expression unreadable. Mitzi whimpered, and Laura Easterbrook whispered to her husband. Craddock turned to Mitzi. "You claimed to see Miss Blacklock with a gun that night. Tell us again." Mitzi, urged by Miss Marple's nod, stood, her voice shaking. "I saw her, in the dark, holding a gun shining like metal. Then the lights went out, and the man died." Letitia rose, her voice icy. "That's nonsense, Inspector." Mitzi's confused, as always, but her composure cracked, her hands trembling. Miss Marple watched, her heart quickening. The light was working. That night, the household at Little Paddocks was on edge. Letitia, alone in her room, stared at the photograph of Charlotte, her face a mask of fear. Patrick and Julia, in the garden, argued fiercely, their voices low. Philippa, in her annex, wrote a letter, her pen shaking. Mitzi, locking the kitchen, prayed aloud. And in the vicarage, Miss Marple opened her notebook, writing. Charlotte faltered, as the impostor's mask began to slip, revealing a truth as sharp and cold as the frost outside. Chapter 9. The trap. The November gloom had deepened over Chipping Cleghorn. The sky a leaden canopy that pressed down on the village's slate roofs. Little Paddocks, its once welcoming facade now shadowed by suspicion, stood like a sentinel at the lane's end, its windows reflecting the flicker of lamplight within. The confrontation at the village hall had sent ripples through the community, with whispers of Charlotte Blacklock's possible survival and Mitzi's wild accusations fueling fresh speculation. The deaths of Rudy Schurz and Dora Bunner hung heavy, their mysteries entwined with the secrets of Letitia Blacklock's household. Miss Jane Marple, her presence at the vicarage, a quiet constant, felt the tension coiling tighter, her mind a delicate instrument tuned to the dissonant notes of deceit. On the morning of November 15th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's parlour, a tray of tea and toast untouched beside her. Her knitting, a soft heap of lavender wool, lay idle, her thoughts consumed by the events at the hall. Letitia's faltering composure, Patrick's strained glances, Julia's sharp silence, Philippa's nervous intensity, and Mitzi's fearful outburst had confirmed her theory. Letitia was likely Charlotte, masquerading to secure Randall Godler's fortune, with Schurz and Dora killed to protect her secret. Patrick and Julia, she suspected, were Pip and Emma, Godler's heirs, their vague pasts a clue to their hidden claim. The creaking door, the oiled hinges, the staged shooting, all pointed to a plan as intricate as it was ruthless. Yet the trap set at the hall, designed to provoke a reaction, had not yet sprung fully. Bunch Harmon, dusting the mantel, caught her aunt's pensive look. "Aunt Jane, you're plotting something, aren't you? That whole business, did it work?" Mr. Marple's blue eyes flickered, her voice soft but resolute. "It stirred the waters, my dear, but the fish hasn't bitten yet. Letitia or Charlotte's shaken, but she's clever. We must tighten the net." Bunch shivered, setting down her cloth. "You're braver than I'd be, poking at a murderer." "What's next?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "A bolder move, I think. Lies thrive in shadows, but light makes them squirm. I must speak with Inspector Craddock." Her opportunity came at noon, when Craddock called at the vicarage, his grey suit rumpled from a sleepless night. "Miss Marple, that stunt at the hall was a gamble," he said, accepting a cup of tea. "Miss Blacklock's rattled, but she's holding firm. Mitzi's story about the gun wild, but it's got me thinking. What's your next step?" Miss Marple folded her hands, her expression mild but her mind razor-sharp. "Inspector, we must push harder. Letitia's secret, her identity as Charlotte, is the key. If we can make her believe we know, she may act rashly, and we must watch Patrick and Julia closely. If they're Pip and Emma, they're either complicit or in danger." Craddock leaned forward, intrigued. "You're suggesting another confrontation?" Miss Marple nodded. "A private one, at Little Paddocks. Invite the household, and a few other Smiths, Hinchcliffe, Miss Murgatroyd, the East. Hint that we've evidence of Charlotte's survival, and that Schurz was killed to protect it. Let Mitzi repeat her tale, under pressure. Someone will crack." Craddock rubbed his chin. "Risky, but I'm game. I've got new information. The typist from the Royale, linked to Schurz, was seen in London, using a name tied to a Swiss clinic where Charlotte was treated. It's thin, but it suggests Schurz knew something about her." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "That's significant, Inspector. Schurz was no random thief. He was a pawn, perhaps blackmailing Charlotte. The advertisement was her trap, to kill him publicly, masking it as a game gone wrong. Dora's death was to silence her suspicions about the scar, the past. Craddock jotted a note. I'm checking the clinic's records, what's left of them, and I'm digging into Patrick and Julia's origins. No birth certificates match their story. They could be godless twins, hiding in plain sight. They agreed on a plan. Craddock would summon the household to Little Paddocks that evening, under the pretense of clarifying Dora's death. Miss Marple would attend, observing reactions, with Mitzi primed to repeat her claim of seeing Letitia. With a gun, we'll shake the tree, Craddock said, and see what falls. Miss Marple smiled, her heart quickening. Be ready, Inspector. A cornered liar is dangerous. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the Bluebird Calf, where gossip swirled like steam from the teapots. Mrs. Finch, serving scones, shared a fresh tidbit. Miss Hinchcliffe had reiterated seeing a stranger near Little Paddocks the night of the shooting, a tall figure by the gate before the lights went out. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind turning to this new clue. A stranger, or someone known, slipping into the chaos. She recalled Craddock's typist, possibly a link to Charlotte's past. The net was tightening, but the quarry was elusive. At 6 o'clock, Little Paddocks was a tableau of strained civility. The drawing room, warmed by a fire, felt stifling, its chintz curtains drawn against the dark. Letitia Blacklock sat by the sideboard, her dark dress austere, her scarf high. Patrick lounged by the fire, his whiskey glass half empty, his grin absent. Julia, in a grey sweater, stood near the window, her eyes darting to the door. Philippa Hames, pale and silent, sat on the sofa, her hands clasped. Mitzi, serving sherry, moved like a startled deer, her tray rattling. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd, invited as witnesses, sat stiffly, Hinchcliffe's tweed jacket square, Murgatroyd's cardigan bunched. Colonel Easterbrook, his moustache bristling, flanked. Laura, whose scarlet dress was a defiant splash of colour. Miss Marple, slipping in quietly, took a chair near the creaking door, her presence a soft shadow. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his voice calm but edged. Thank you for coming. We're here to clarify Miss Bunner's death, and its link to Rudy Scherz's new evidence suggests a deeper motive tied to Miss Blacklock's past. He paused, his eyes on Letitia. We've reason to believe Charlotte Blacklock, thought dead, may have survived, and that Scherz's death was to protect this secret. A hush fell, broken only by Mitzi's gasp. Letitia's face drained of colour, her hand clutching her scarf, but she said nothing. Patrick's glass stopped midway to his lips, and Julia's jaw tightened. Philippa's eyes widened, her fingers twisting. Miss Marple watched, her heart steady, her mind alert. Craddock turned to Mitzi, his tone firm. Mitzi, you said you saw Miss Blacklock with a gun that night. Tell us again, exactly. Mitzi, trembling, stepped forward, her voice shrill. I swear, Inspector, I saw her, by the sideboard, holding a gun shining, in the dark. Then the lights went out, and the man died. Letitia stood, her voice icy. That's preposterous. Mitzi, you're lying. Someone's put you up to this. Her composure shattered, her hands shaking. Miss Marple noted the panic in her eyes, the way her scarf slipped, revealing the scar, a faint surgical line, not a goiter's mark. Chaos erupted. Patrick swore, slamming his glass down. This is madness. Aunt Letty, a killer. Mitzi's off her rocker. Julia grabbed his arm, hissing, Shut up, Patrick. Philippa shrank back, her face ashen. Miss Hinchcliffe barked, "Quiet, all of you. Let the girl speak." Mitzi, sobbing, collapsed into a chair, and Craddock raised a hand for silence. "Miss Blacklock, can you explain Mitzi's claim?" Letitia, regaining control, said, "She's mistaken, Inspector. I held no gun. The shock has confused her." But her voice trembled, and Miss Marple saw the lie in her eyes as Craddock pressed on. Questioning alibis for Dora's death, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the creaking door, its hinges gleaming. She recalled its squeak, silenced since the shooting, and Mitzi's shadow. Someone had moved in the dark. She was sure perhaps Letitia, orchestrating the shots, or an accomplice. She leaned toward Miss Murgatroyd, whispering, "That night, where was Miss Simmons Julia during the blackout?" Murgatroyd, flustered, frowned. I think she was by the fire, but wait. No, she wasn't. I didn't see her till the lights came back." Her voice rose, and Julia's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Julia, absent during the blackout, could have slipped through the door, tampered with the fuse, or worse. She filed the clue away, her mind racing. Craddock, unaware, concluded the meeting, warning all to remain available. As the guests dispersed, Letitia approached Miss Marple, her smile strained. "You're very observant, Miss Marple, I hope. You don't believe Mitzi's nonsense." Miss Marple's eyes were gentle, but her voice held steel. "I believe in truth, Miss Blacklock. It has a way of surfacing like a stone in a stream." Letitia's face froze, and she turned away, her scarf pulled tight. That night, the village was quiet, but danger stirred. Miss Murgatroyd, walking home with Miss Hinchcliffe, paused by their cottage gate. "Hinch, I remembered something. Julia wasn't there during the blackout." "I'm sure of it. We must tell the inspector." Hinchcliffe nodded, her face grim. "Tomorrow, Amy. It's late." But as they entered, a shadow moved in the garden, unseen. Hours later, Miss Murgatroyd, alone in her room, heard a creak. Before she could scream, a cord tightened around her throat, and she fell. Her last thought of Julia's absence. The next morning, Hinchcliffe's anguished cry woke the village. Craddock summoned 2 boulders, found Murgatroyd's body, her face blue. A silk scarf knotted around her neck. "Strangled," he said, his voice tight. "She knew something, didn't she?" Miss Marple, arriving with Bunch, nodded, her heart heavy. She remembered Julia's absence, Inspector. It was fatal. Craddock's jaw clenched. "This ends now. I'm searching little paddocks, top to bottom." Miss Marple touched his arm. "Be careful, Inspector. The killer is desperate, and they're close." At Little Paddocks, the household reeled. Letitia, pale, claimed shock, but her eyes were wary. Patrick, hungover, muttered about curses. Julia, her face a mask, said little, but her hands shook. Philippa, in her annex, wept silently, her fear palpable. Mitzi, locking the doors, prayed aloud. And in the vicarage, Miss Marple opened her notebook, writing, "Julia moved," as the trap closed, revealing a killer whose desperation had turned deadly, and a truth that lay just beyond her grasp. Chapter 10. The confession. The November frost had hardened into a bitter cold that seeped into chipping Cleghorn's bones, glazing the lanes with ice and shrouding Little Paddocks in a ghostly mist. The village, once vibrant with gossip, now whispered in hushed tones the murders of Rudy Schurz, Dora Bunner, and now Amy Murgatroyd, casting a pall as heavy as the fog. The confrontation at little paddocks, designed to shake the impostor, had instead provoked a third death, confirming Miss Jane Marple's fears. The killer was desperate, their secrets teetering on exposure. The household: Letitia Blacklock, Patrick and Julia Simmons, Philippa Hames, and Mitzi was a cauldron of suspicion, each member a potential player in a deadly charade. Miss Marple, her resolve unshaken at the vicarage, knew the time for subtlety had passed. The truth, like a buried root, must be dug out, no matter the cost. On the morning of November 17th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's parlour, the fire's warmth a faint bulwark against the chill. Her knitting, a tangle of lavender wool, lay abandoned, her mind consumed by the puzzle's latest piece, Murgatroyd's murder, triggered by her recollection of Julia's absence during the blackout. The creaking door, the oiled hinges, Mitzi's claim of a gun in Letitia's hand. The scar on Letitia's neck-hall pointed to Charlotte Blacklock masquerading as her sister to secure Randall Godler's fortune. Patrick and Julia, likely Pip and Emma, Godler's heirs, were either complicit or unwitting pawns. Scherz's death, Miss Marple believed, was to silence his knowledge of Charlotte's identity. Doros, to quell her suspicions, and to bury her dangerous memory. The advertisement, a lure to stage a public killing, tied it all together. But the killer's next move was uncertain. Bunch, Harmon, setting out scones, caught her aunt's grim expression. "Aunt Jane, you look like you're planning a war. Poor Miss Murgatroyd, how much worse can this get?" Miss Marple's blue eyes were steady, her voice soft but resolute. "As bad as it must, my dear, until the truth is out." Death was a mistake. The killer acted in panic. We must act in precision. Bunch shivered, her hands pausing. "You mean another trap?" "After last time?" Miss Marple nodded. "A final one, I think. The impostor is cornered, and cornered creatures strike or confess." Her first step was a meeting with Inspector Craddock, who arrived at the vicarage with a face as grim as the weather. "Miss Marple, Murgatroyd's death has lit a fire under this case," he said, accepting tea. "Strangled with a scarf, no prints, no witnesses. Hinchcliffe's beside herself, says Murgatroyd remembered Julia wasn't in the room during the shooting. That's what got her killed." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Exactly, Inspector. Julia's absence suggests she moved perhaps to the fuse box, or to aid the shooting. But Letitia Charlotte's the linchpin. Her scar, Mitzi's story, Dora's diary, it all points to her." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "I've got more. The Swiss clinic's records, patchy as they are, show Charlotte Blacklock was discharged, not deceased, in 1938. No trace of her after, but it's enough to question Letitia's identity. And Patrick and Julia, their birth records don't exist under Simmons. They could be Pip and Emma, Sonia Godler's twins, adopted or hidden after her death." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "That fits, Inspector. If they're the heirs, they're a threat to Charlotte's claymore, her allies. We must confront her, publicly, with evidence she can't deny." They devised a bold plan, a gathering at the vicarage, under the guise of discussing Murgatroyd's death, with the household, Miss Hinchcliffe, and the Easterbrooks invited. Craddock would present the clinic's records, hinting at Charlotte's survival, and press Mitzi to repeat her tale of the gun. Miss Marple would watch, her presence a quiet prod, trusting the killer's nerve would break. "We'll need Mitzi's cooperation," Craddock said. "She's terrified, but I'll offer protection." Miss Marple nodded. "And we must protect Julia if she's innocent. Her absence during the blackout makes her a target or a suspect. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Little Paddocks to ensure Mitzi's resolve. The cottage was hushed, its air heavy with unspoken fear. Mitzi, scrubbing pots in the kitchen, jumped at Miss Marple's arrival. "Miss, you come again. This house, it is death." Her voice trembled, but Miss Marple's gentle touch steadied her. "Mitzi, you saw something vital that night, a gun in Miss Blacklock's hand. Will you tell the inspector again at the vicarage tonight? It could save lives." Mitzi's eyes widened, but she nodded, clutching a rosary. "I will, miss. But I am afraid she watches, always." Miss Marple patted her hand, wondering if Mitzi's fear was of Letitia alone in the drawing room. Letitia was sorting papers, her dark dress stark against her pale skin. "Miss Marple, you're tireless," she said, her smile strained. "I suppose you're here about poor Amy Murgatroyd." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair. "A tragedy, Miss Blacklock. It's curious, isn't it, how memories can be dangerous." Miss Murgatroyd recalled Julia's absence during the shooting. Letitia's hand froze on a letter, but her voice was steady. "Memories are unreliable, Miss Marple." Amy was flustered, easily confused. Miss Marple's eyes were gentle, but her words cut. "Perhaps, but truth, like a scar, leaves a mark that lingers." Letitia's scarf shifted, revealing the faint surgical line, and she quickly adjusted it, her face unreadable. Patrick and Julia, entering, broke the tension. Patrick, his tie loose, grinned. "Miss Marple, you're everywhere. Planning to arrest us all." Julia, in a navy sweater, shot him a look. "Don't be tiresome, Patrick. Miss Marple's only concerned." Miss Marple smiled, steering the conversation to their past. "You've adapted so well to village life, Miss Simmons. Was London very different?" Julia's eyes narrowed, but she answered smoothly. "Crowded, noisy. We were glad to leave it." Patrick chimed in. "Aunt Lettie's our saviour, eh, Jules?" Their ease was practiced, but Miss Marple sensed a guardedness, as if they feared a misstep. Philippa Hames, returning from the nursery, joined them briefly, her face drawn. "Miss Blacklock, I'll be in my annex," she said, her voice low. Miss Marple, seizing the moment, remarked, "Mrs. Hames, you must find the nursery a refuge with all this trouble. But the cyanide there, it's troubling, isn't it?" Philippa's hands clenched. "It's secure, Miss Marple. I've never touched it." Her denial was fierce, and Miss Marple wondered at her fear. Was it guilt or coercion? As she left, Miss Marple paused by the creaking door, now silent, its hinges gleaming. She opened it, noting its view of the hall and the fuse box, a path for a swift exit in the dark. The bullet hole in the panelling, high above the sideboard, nagged at her, a shot meant to graze or to deceive. She recalled Mitzi's shadow, the gun in Letitia's hand. The pieces were aligning, but the confession she sought was a gamble. That evening, the vicarage parlour was crowded, its warmth at odds with the icy tension. Letitia sat by the fire, her scarf high, her face composed but pale. Patrick louned his whiskey untouched, his eyes darting. Julia, in a grey dress, sat stiffly, her hands clasped. Philippa, pale, kept her gaze down. Mitzi, serving tea, trembled, her eyes on Craddock. Miss Hinchcliffe, her face grim, sat with arms crossed, mourning Murgatroyd. Colonel Easterbrook, his moustache bristling, flanked Laura, whose emerald shawl drew eyes. Bunch, hovering, kept the teapot filled, her glances at Miss Marple anxious. Miss Marple, near the window, blended into the shadows, her notebook hidden. In her shawl, Craddock stood, his voice clear. We're here to discuss Miss Murgatroyd's death and its link to the others. New evidence points to a deception at Little Paddocks, tied to Charlotte Blacklock's survival. He held up a telegram. Records from a Swiss clinic show Charlotte was discharged in 1938, not deceased. We believe she may be here, posing as Letitia, to claim Godeless fortune. A gasp rippled through the room. Letitia's face froze, her hand clutching her scarf, but she said nothing. Patrick's jaw clenched, and Julia's eyes flashed. Philippa's head jerked up, her lips parting. Mitzi whimpered, and Laura Easterbrook whispered to her husband. Craddock turned to Mitzi, his tone firm. Mitzi, you saw Miss Blacklock with a gun that night. Tell us again. Mitzi, urged by Miss Marple's nod, stood, her voice shrill. I saw her, Inspector, by the sideboard, holding a gun, shining. Then the lights went out, and the man died. Letitia rose, her voice a lash. Lies. You've been bribed, Mitzi. Someone's using you. Her composure shattered, her scarf slipping to reveal the scar a clean, surgical line. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The net was closing. Patrick leaped up, swearing, This is insane. Aunt Letty, a murderer. You're all mad. Julia grabbed his arm, hissing, Be quiet, Patrick. Philippa shrank back, her face ashen. Miss Hinchcliffe barked, Let the girl finish. Craddock raised a hand, his eyes on Letitia. Miss Blacklock, can you explain this? Letitia's hands shook, her voice trembling. Mitzi's mistaken. I had no gun. This is a witch hunt. But her eyes, wild with panic, betrayed her, Miss Marple. Stepping forward, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Miss Blacklock, or should I say Charlotte? The scar, Dora's doubts, Shers's knowledge, it all points to you. You staged the shooting to kill him, grazed your ear to play the victim, and silenced Dora and Murgatroyd when they suspected. The advertisement was your lure to make it public. The room stilled, every eye on Letitia. Her face crumpled, and she sank into her chair, her voice a whisper. You're wrong, but I can't fight it anymore. In a broken voice, she confessed, I am Charlotte. Letitia died in 1940, ill in London. I took her place, no one questioned it, not after the war's chaos. Godless fortune was mine if Belle died. Shers, a clerk at the clinic, recognized me at the Royale, demanded money. I hired him for the game, rigged the fuse box, and shot him, grazing myself to deflect suspicion. Dora began to notice my scar, my habits. I poisoned her aspirin. Murgatroyd. She saw Julia move, and I couldn't risk it. Her voice broke, tears streaming. I only wanted what was mine. The room was silent, the confession a thunderclap. Patrick, pale, muttered, My God. Julia, her face hard, said nothing. Philippa wept softly, her hands covering her face. Mitzi sobbed, clutching her rosary. Miss Hinchcliffe's fists clenched. Her grief raw. Craddock, his voice steady, said, Charlotte Blacklock, you're under arrest for the murders of Rudy Shers, Dora Bunner, and Amy Murgatroyd. He signalled a constable, who led her out, her scarf trailing like a fallen flag. Miss Marple, her heart heavy, spoke to Craddock. It's done, Inspector, but there's more. Julia's absence, check her role. Craddock nodded, his eyes on Julia, who rose and slipped out, her face unreadable. Miss Marple followed, her instincts sharp, but Julia was gone, vanishing. Into the fog, at Little Paddocks, The household reeled: Patrick, drunk; Philippa, broken; Mitzi, praying. And in the vicarage, Miss Marple opened her notebook, writing, "Charlotte confessed, but Julia." As the confession closed one chapter, leaving another dangerously open. Chapter 11. The accomplices. The November cold had tightened its hold on Chipping Cleghorn. The frost etching filigrees on every window, and the mist cloaking the village in a spectral hush. Little Paddocks, stripped of its former warmth, stood forlorn at the lane's end, its roses withered and its chimneys trailing thin smoke into the grey dawn. Charlotte Blacklock's confession at the vicarage had shattered the household's fragile facade. Her admission of masquerading as Letitia to secure Randall Goadler's fortune and her murders of Rudy Schurz, Dora Bunner, and Amy Murgatroyd, echoing through the village like a tolling bell. Yet Miss Jane Marple, her resolve unyielding at the vicarage, sensed the puzzle was incomplete. Julia Simmons' swift departure during the confession, her absence during the blackout, and the lingering question of accomplices gnawed at her. The truth, she knew, was a tapestry with threads still unpulled. On the morning of November 18th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's parlour, the fire's glow a faint counter to the chill seeping through the walls. Her knitting, a soft pile of lavender wool, lay untouched, her mind a quiet whirl of deductions. Charlotte's confession had clarified the heart of the scheme: a sister's identity stolen, a fortune coveted, and 3 lives taken to protect the deception. Schurz, a blackmailer, from her Swiss past, had been lured by the advertisement and killed in a staged game. Dora, with her muddled memories of Charlotte's scar, had been poisoned to silence her doubts. Murgatroyd, recalling Julia's absence during the blackout, had been strangled to bury her in sight. But Julia's role, her absence, her guarded demeanour suggested she was more than a bystander, and Philippa Haim's nervous intensity hinted at a deeper involvement. The creaking door, the cyanide, the oiled hinges all pointed to collaboration, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover it. Bunch Harmon, arranging teacups, glanced at her aunt's pensive face. "Aunt Jane, you're still at it, aren't you? Charlotte's confessed. Isn't that enough?" Miss Marple's blue eyes were steady, her voice soft but firm. "Not quite, my dear. Charlotte acted, but not alone. The blackout required timing, the cyanide access, the doors silent. Someone helped, knowingly or not. Julia's absence is a clue, and Philippa's fear is no accident." Bunch shivered, setting down a saucer. "You're saying there's another killer? That's terrifying." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Not another killer, perhaps, but accomplices caught in Charlotte's web. We must untangle it before they slip away." Her first move was a call to Inspector Craddock, who arrived at the vicarage with a weary air, his grey suit creased from a night of reports. "Miss Marple, you were right about Charlotte," he said, accepting coffee. "She's in custody, talking freely now, admits to the lot, even rigging the fuse box herself. But she's cagey about help. Says she acted alone." Miss Marple's lips pursed. She would, Inspector. Pride or fear keeps her silent. But consider Julia absent during the blackout, gone after the confession, and Philippa her access to cyanide, her agitation. They're pieces of the puzzle. Craddock nodded, his notebook open. "Julia's vanished. We're searching. Her room's empty, no note. Patrick's a mess, claims he knows nothing. Philippa's at Little Paddocks, but she's clammed up. Mitzi's still ranting about shadows." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice deliberate. "Inspector, the cyanide is key. It came from the nursery, where Philippa works. Charlotte had no access, but Philippa did. Was she coerced or complicit? And Julia, her absence suggests she tampered with the fuse, or worse. We must question them closely and search little paddocks for evidence, a letter, a tool, anything. Craddock rubbed his chin, impressed. You're relentless. I've got men searching the house now, and I'm checking Julia's Simmons' story doesn't hold. She and Patrick could be Pip and Emma, Godler's heirs, but they're not talking. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Then we must make them talk, Inspector. A final gathering at Little Paddocks to press the truth. They planned a confrontation that evening, summoning the remaining household, Patrick, Philippa, and Mitzi, along with Miss Hinchcliffe, whose grief for Murgatroyd made her a keen observer. Craddock would present evidence of the source and Julia's absence, pressing Philippa and Patrick for answers. Miss Marple would watch, her presence a quiet goad, trusting fear or guilt would loosen tongues. We'll need Mitzi's story again, Craddock said. Her shadow, the Whodunits rattled them before. Miss Marple nodded. And we must find Julia. If she's Pip or Emma, she's either fleeing danger or guilt. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Little Paddocks to gauge the household's mood and ensure Mitzi's resolve. The cottage was a husk, its warmth drained by Charlotte's absence. Mitzi opened the door, her apron twisted, her eyes red. Miss Marple, you come to this cursed place. It is empty now, but still bad. Her voice quavered, and Miss Marple soothed her, following her to the kitchen. Mitzi, you've been brave, telling the inspector what you saw. Will you do it again tonight, about the gun, the shadow? Mitzi clutched a knife, her hands trembling. I will, miss, but I am afraid. Miss Julia, she was not there. I know it now. She moves like a cat, silent. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Mitzi's fear was sharpening her memory in the drawing room. Patrick sprawled by the fire, a whiskey bottle half empty beside him. Miss Marple, you're a fixture now, he said, his grin hollow. Come to pick over the wreckage. His bravado was brittle, and Miss Marple noted the shadows under his eyes. Only to understand, Mr. Simmons, she said gently. You and Julia, you've been through so much. Where is she now? Patrick's hand tightened on his glass. No idea. Bolted after that vicarage circus. She's always been a law unto herself. His tone was bitter, and Miss Marple wondered at the rift between the siblings. Were they siblings at all? Philippa Hames entered, her coat damp from the nursery, her face pale. Miss Marple, you're here again, she said, her voice low. Is there news? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes keen. Only questions, Mrs. Hames. The cyanide from your nursery, it's troubling, isn't it? How could it reach Dora's aspirin? Philippa's hands clenched, her voice sharp. I don't know. It's locked, always. Someone must have stolen it. Her denial was fierce, but her eyes darted to Patrick, a flicker of fear or guilt. Miss Marple filed it away, her suspicions deepening. As she left, Miss Marple paused by the creaking door, its hinges still gleaming. She opened it, tracing the path to the fuse box, a silent accomplice in the blackout. The bullet hole in the paneling, high above the sideboard, nagged at her shot meant to graze Charlotte or to deceive. She recalled Mitzi's shadow, the gun in Charlotte's hand, and now Julia's absence, confirmed by Murgatroyd's fatal memory. The accomplices were close, their roles clearer with each step. At the Bluebird Calf, Miss Marple gathered final threads of gossip. Mrs. Finch, pouring tea, shared a rumour. Philippa had been seen at the nursery late at night, weeks before Dora's death, fiddling with something in the shed. Miss Hinch, stopping by, confirmed her sighting of a stranger near Little Paddocks, tall, in a coat, the night of the shooting. Miss Marple thanked them, her mind turning to the stranger, perhaps Julia, or the missing typist linked to Schurz. The net was closing, but the quarry was wary. That evening, Little Paddocks' drawing room was a crucible of tension, its fire casting long shadows. Patrick sat by the sideboard, his whiskey untouched, his face haggard. Philippa perched on the sofa, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Mitzi, serving coffee, moved like a ghost, her eyes wide. Miss Hinchcliffe, her tweed jacket square, stood by the window, her grief a quiet fury. Colonel Easterbrook and Laura, invited for context, sat stiffly, Laura's violet dress a jarring note. Bunch, assisting with tea, kept close to Miss Marple, who took a chair near the creaking door, her presence a soft prod in the charged air. Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his voice steady but relentless. "We're here to close this case," Craddock began, his eyes sweeping. "The room? Charlotte Blacklock confessed to 3 murders, but she didn't act alone. The cyanide came from the nursery, Mrs. Hames your domain, and Miss Simmons absent during the blackout, as Miss Murgatroyd recalled, fatally. We need answers." Patrick swore, his voice hoarse. "Julia's gone, Inspector. I don't know where. She's no killer." Philippa's head jerked up, her voice trembling. "I didn't touch the cyanide. It's locked, I swear." Mitzi whimpered, clutching her tray, and Miss Hinchcliffe's fists clenched. Craddock turned to Philippa, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Hames, you were seen at the nursery shed, late, before Miss Bunner's death. Explain." Philippa's face crumpled, tears spilling. I was checking tools, that's all. But Charlotte asked for help, weeks ago. She said she needed medicine for Dora's headaches. I gave her access, just once. I didn't know it was cyanide." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple's heart sank. Coercion, not complicity, but damning nonetheless. Craddock pressed, "And you said nothing." "Why?" Philippa sobbed. "She threatened my son, said she'd ruin his schooling." I was desperate. Patrick, rising, shouted, "This is madness. Philippa, you're lying to save yourself." But his eyes were wild, and Miss Marple saw fear, not innocence. Craddock turned to him. "And you, Mr. Simmons? Your sister's gone. Your story's thin. Are you Pip, Godler's heir, protecting Charlotte for a cut?" Patrick's face paled, but he shook his head. "I'm no heir. Julia and I were just cousins, scraping by. She's scared, that's why she ran." His denial was weak, and Miss Marple noted his glance at the door, as if he too might bolt. Mitzi, urged by Craddock, stepped forward, her voice shrill. "I saw Miss Blacklock with a gun, Inspector, and a shadow Miss Julia. She was not there. She moved. I know it." Patrick rounded on her. "Shut up, you fool." But Craddock's eyes were on Philippa, who wept, and Patrick, who sagged, his defiance crumbling. Miss Marple, rising, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the din. "Mrs. Hames, you were trapped by fear, but you've helped now. Mr. Simmons, your sister's absence, she tampered with the fuse, didn't she? To aid Charlotte, or to protect your claim as Pip?" Patrick's shoulders slumped, his voice a whisper. "Julia's, not Pip. I am Pip, I mean. Sonia Godler's son. Julia's my cousin, not Emma. We came to watch Letitia Charlotte, knowing she'd stolen the fortune. Julia fixed the fuse, yes, to scare her, to make her slip. But we didn't kill anyone. His confession, raw and halting, stunned the room. Miss Hinchcliffe swore softly, and Laura Easterbrook gasped. Philippa's sobs quieted, her guilt eased by truth. Craddock, his voice firm, said, "Patrick Simmons, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting. We'll find Julia." He signalled a constable, who led Patrick out, his head bowed. Trembling, was cautioned but released, her role coerced, not criminal. Mitzi, weeping, fled to the kitchen. Miss Marple, her heart heavy, spoke to Craddock. "It's nearly done, Inspector. Julia's flight, she's Emma, I suspect, hiding her claim. Find her before she's lost." Craddock nodded, his respect for her unshaken. "You've unravelled it, Miss Marple. I'll track her." At Little Paddocks, the night passed in silence. Its occupants scattered, Patrick in custody, Philippa in her annex, Mitzi praying, Julia gone. The village, waking to news of arrests, buzzed anew, but the heart of the mystery was bared. Miss Marple, back at the vicarage, opened her notebook, writing, "Philippa, coerced, Patrick, Pip, Julia, Emma." As the accomplices' roles clarified, leaving one thread, Julia's fate dangling in the cold, unforgiving mist. Chapter 12. The village settles. The November mist had lifted from Chipping Cleghorn, giving way to a crystalline winter light that bathed the village in a deceptive calm. The elms stood bare, their skeletal branches etched against a sky of pale blue, and the frost sparkled on the rooftops like scattered diamonds. Little Paddocks, its roses long faded, seemed to exhale at last, its secrets laid bare by Charlotte. Blacklock's confession and the unravelling of her accomplices, the murders of Rudy Schurz, Dora Bunner and Amy Murgatroyd, once a shroud of terror, were now a closed chapter, their motives rooted in greed and deception. Yet Miss Jane Marple, preparing to depart the vicarage, knew that even settled truths left ripples, and Chipping Cleghorn would carry the scars of its ordeal for years to come. On the morning of November 20th, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage's cosy parlour, her black travelling bag packed and waiting by the door. A fire crackled, casting warmth across the chintz armchairs, but her thoughts were cool and precise, sifting through the case's final threads. Charlotte, unmasked as the impostor who had assumed her sister Letitia's identity, was in custody. Her confession detailing the murders she orchestrated to secure Randall Goadler's fortune. Schurz, a blackmailer from her Swiss past, had been lured by the advertisement and shot in a staged blackout, with Charlotte grazing her own ear to play the victim. Dora, her old friend whose memories of Charlotte's scar stirred suspicion, was poisoned with cyanide-laced aspirin. Murgatroyd, recalling Julia Simmons' absence during the shooting, was strangled to silence her insight. Patrick Simmons, revealed as Pip, one of Goadler's heirs, and Philippa Hames, coerced into providing the cyanide, were Charlotte's reluctant accomplices, while Julia, likely Emma, had fled, her role in the fuse box tampering a lingering question. Bunch Harmon, bustling in with a tray of tea and scones, broke her aunt's reverie. "Aunt Jane, you're leaving us already. The village won't be the same without you poking into everyone's secrets." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held a mix of awe and relief. Miss Marple's lips twitched, her blue eyes twinkling. "My dear, villagers are never short of secrets, but this one's had its share for now. I'm only glad the truth came out, though it cost dearly." Bunch set down the tray, her face sobering. Poor Dora and Miss Murgatroyd, and even that Schur's fellow, and Charlotte Shea seemed so proper. "How did you know?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her voice soft but deliberate. People, bunch, are like patterns in a quilt. You notice the stitches that don't quite match the scar Charlotte hid. Dora's ramblings, Julia's absence. Greed stitches tightly, but it frays under pressure. Bunch shivered, spreading jam on a scone. And Patrick, Philippa, Julia, they all helped in their way. It's so tangled. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking as she resumed her work, a lavender scarf taking shape. Tangled, yes, but human. Fear and need can twist even good hearts. Her final task before departing was a meeting with Inspector Craddock, who arrived at the vicarage with a brisk step, his grey suit pressed, but his face etched with fatigue. "Miss Marple, you've done it again," he said, accepting a chair and a cup of tea. "Charlotte's locked up, charged with 3 murders. Patrick's facing aiding and abetting, though his role was minor, mostly lies to protect Julia. Philippa's free, her coercion clear, but she's broken, poor woman. We're still hunting Julia." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Simmons' Emma, I presume. Her flight suggests guilt or fear. What have you found?" Craddock opened his notebook, his voice crisp. "Julia's trail's cold, but we've got a lead. She was spotted at a London station, boarding a train north. Her papers, left at Little Paddocks, show no Simmons birth record, but a letter from a Swiss lawyer mentions Emma, tied to Sonia Godler. She's likely the second heir, hiding with Patrick to watch Charlotte. She tampered with the fuse box, Charlotte confirmed, to spook her into a mistake, not to kill. But Murgatroyd's death, she swears she's innocent, via a note left with Patrick." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "A note, curious. She's protecting her claim or her freedom. You'll find her, Inspector." Craddock leaned forward, his respect evident. "Your theory about Charlotte Titt was spot on. The clinic records, the scar, Scherz's Swiss connection, you saw it all. How?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her needles clicking. "I only notice, Inspector, what others overlook. A scar's not just a mark, it's a story. Dora's chatter, Mitzi's fear, Murgatroyd's memory, they told the tale, if you listened." Craddock chuckled, closing his notebook. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. The village owes you, though they'll never know it." Their conversation turned to the aftermath. Charlotte, Craddock said, had detailed her scheme. After Letitia's death in 1940, she assumed her identity, her surgical scar from a operation hidden by high collars. Godler's will, promising wealth if Belle Godler died, was her prize, but Scherz, a clerk at the clinic, recognized her at the Royale Hotel and demanded hush money. The advertisement was her trap, drawing a crowd to mask his murder as a game gone wrong. Dora's growing suspicions, sparked by the scar and old memories, led to her poisoning, with Philippa coerced into providing the cyanide under threat to her son's future. Murgatroyd's recollection of Julia's absence, shared with Miss Hinch, sealed her fate, with Charlotte strangling her in a panic. Patrick and Julia, as Pip and Emma, had come to Chipping Cleghorn to monitor Charlotte. Their own claim to the fortune a secret, but their tampering with the fuse box had unwittingly aided her plan. Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting the details. Philippa's role was tragic. She said softly, fear for her child drove her, not greed. And Patrick Pippi was loyal to Julia, but naive. Julia, though she's the loose thread. Her flight suggests she knows more, or fears retribution. Craddock nodded, his voice grim. If she's Emma, she's got a fortune waiting, but she's running from Usor, someone else. Belle Godler's still alive, frail in Scotland, so the will's on hold. We're watching. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes distant. The fortune, Inspector, was the spark, but it burned out lives. Charlotte's greed, Patrick's loyalty, Philippa's fear, Julia's ambition, they're all human, terribly so. Craddock smiled wryly. You make it sound simple, but it's a devil of a case. Anything else I should know before you go? Miss Marple hesitated, then said, only to watch Mitzi. Her fear was real, and she may still feel watched. And the creaking door, check it again. Its silence was no accident. Craddock jotted a note, his respect deepening. I'll do that, Miss Marple. Safe travels. After he left, Miss Marple walked to little paddocks one last time, her black coat buttoned against the cold. The cottage was quiet, its gate creaking softly. Philippa Hames opened the door, her face pale but calmer, her fair hair loose for... Once, Miss Marple, you're leaving, she said, her voice low. I thank you for understanding. I never meant harm. Miss Marple patted her hand, her eyes gentle. I know, my dear, you were caught like a bird in a net. Look after your son and let this pass. Philippa's eyes filled, but she nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Inside, Mitzi was scrubbing the kitchen, her rosary tucked into her apron. Miss Marple, you go now, she said, her eyes wary. This house, it is better, but I still dream of shadows. Miss Marple's voice was soothing. Dreams fade, Mitzi. You were brave, telling the truth. Stay safe and trust the inspector. Mitzi clutched her rosary, her fear easing slightly, and Miss Marple wondered if her shadows were memories of Julia's silent movements. The drawing room, empty now, held echoes of the case. Miss Marple paused by the creaking door, its hinges still gleaming with oil. She opened it, tracing the path to the fuse box, a silent accomplice in Charlotte's plan. The bullet hole in the panelling, high above the sideboard, was a mute witness to the staged shooting. She touched the photograph of Letitia and Charlotte, their faces so alike, Charlotte's neck hidden by a collar. A scar's a story, she murmured, her heart heavy with the lives lost to its telling. Back at the vicarage, Bunch drove her to the station, the car's heater rattling. You'll visit again, Aunt Jane? She asked, her smile warm. Without murders, I hope. Miss Marple laughed softly, her bag in her lap. I hope so, my dear, but trouble finds me, it seems. Take care of Julian, and write often. Bunch hugged her fiercely, and Miss Marple boarded the train, her knitting case tucked under her arm. As the train pulled away, Chipping Cleghorn receded, its rooftops glinting in the winter light. The village settled, its routines resuming milk deliveries, church bells, tea at the Bluebird. Miss Hinchcliffe, tending her garden, mourned Murgatroyd but found solace in work. Philippa, at the nursery, began to heal, her son's letters a lifeline. Mitzi, staying on at little paddocks, prayed less and laughed more, her shadows fading. Patrick, awaiting trial, wrote to Julia, his hope dim but unbroken. Julia, elusive as Emma, vanished into the north, her claim a secret she guarded. Fiercely, Miss Marple, settling into her seat, opened the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette, her eyes scanning for new puzzles. Her needles clicked, the lavender scarf growing, each stitch a quiet triumph over darkness. People are so predictable, she murmured, her voice lost in the train's hum, but so terribly clever at hiding it. The countryside rolled past, and she turned her thoughts to St. Mary Mead, where her garden waited, and perhaps another story, as old as greed and as new as the frost that glittered beyond her window.